lands, stormwater, and water quality, but we added two new ones that the Watershed Council had not focused on before, and that was equity and human well-being and climate change. And we're going to hear some of, in some of our talks today, we're going to hear about some of those topics. I'm really excited about hearing those. Now in 2022, this year, the LIO developed an interactive online GIS mapping tool, which highlights projects by focus area, by those 8 focus areas in our watershed on a map, and points to data and materials to help in this collaboration. So that was a really, these last couple of years were really intense efforts by the Watershed Council. And I really invite all of you to go onto our new website, which was also developed this year. That's puyallupwatershed.org, where you can read all about these new developments since 2018. You can read the ecosystem recovery plan. You can check out the GIS mapping tool. You can find out how to join and participate in the Power LIO and get the agendas and the meeting minutes, quarterly meetings for those. And you can apply for our small grants program for 2023. In this year, we actually awarded $20,000 in grants to 10 projects throughout our watershed. And you can read about our Salmon Homecoming celebration and either participate as a nonprofit or actually attend with your family and enjoy the festivities. In short, there's a lot happening, which I'm sure you will find interesting. And before you leave today, I encourage you to, I think there's a trifold out here where you can sign up, leave your email address, and you can get agendas for our monthly meetings, and also find out when the LIO's various committees, subcommittees are meeting and participate that way. As you can imagine, it took the efforts of a lot of people to accomplish all of this over the last few years. But I would like to take this time to ask all the board members here today to stand so that we can acknowledge their leadership in initiating and supporting all of these efforts. So board members, please stand up and let us acknowledge you. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is just going to go over the agenda a little bit to let you know what's happening today. Just have to finish the welcome. We're going to start with the oral presentation. We're going to have 4, 1:15, 2:35, and actually one of those, there's a minor correction. The third presentation is going to, we're going to substitute one of the poster presentations for that. Yeah. We're not going to have identified first. But we're going to move up the presentation, the poster presentation. Each part is going to stand in for him. And then we'll have a break from 2:35 to 2:50, and you can get some more snacks. And then in the afternoon session, we're going to have 4 more oral presentations. And then after that, and during the break, please use that time to network. Also, take a look at the various poster presentations. And we're not going to have time, we may not have time to ask very many questions of the presenters during the talk. So if you do have some questions, try and find the presenter and get your questions answered. And then 4:30 to 5 o'clock, we'll have the rest of the remaining time here to view the closing.
Sounds great.
Oh, yes, that's a great idea. Yes, I want to thank Crystal, who was our watershed coordinator for the last few years. And we're really going to miss her. Catherine Brooks has taken over that position, and we're really happy to have her and welcome her to the Watershed Council. So our first presenter is Garrett Foster from Washington State University, Puyallup. And he's going to be talking about 6 ppb known toxicity to coho salmon under varied water quality conditions.
Hey everyone. So thanks for the intro. I'm a student right here at this campus. So no further ado. Okay. So just to give a general outline, I'll give you guys some background on coho salmon, and it's probably had around Puget Sound since the 90s, earlier, called urban stormwater runoff mortality syndrome. And then this new chemical discovered only a couple of years ago called 6-ppb, which is the likely cause for urban stormwater runoff syndrome. Then I'll get into the work that I do related to this topic, so general procedure, and then as well as kind of going into these different water quality conditions that I'm studying, how those temperature, dissolved organic carbon, the amount of salt in water, and the acidity of water. And then towards the end, I'll get into maybe some applications of the studies that I'm doing right now. Okay, so background on coho salmon. Here you can see kind of the life cycle of coho. I'll start with the embryos. Right now, I'm actually doing an exposure with coho embryos, and they're protected by these really thick coils. So we're exposing them to this chemical 6-ppb, but they've got this super thick protective kind of layer, outer layer. So they're not as sensitive as some of these life stages. Then they advance to elvin. So after they hatch, they've still got their yolk sacs there. I do most of my experiments with this next life stage, which is par, and they live in streams in this watershed for about a minute.
Sorry, could you speak up a bit louder?
Yeah.
On Zoom. Thank you.
Better if I.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, cool. So after the par stage, salmon go through this physiological change where it prepares them to enter into salt water. That's called smoltification. So a lot of biochemical changes happen at their gills. They get longer, and they also develop this sort of camouflage that allows them to blend in a little better in the ocean environment. And then after that, they're living in the ocean for 2 or 3 years. They go on this amazing kind of counterclockwise migration route across the North Pacific, and then come back to spawn, usually in the stream that they originally came from. So they have this amazing ability to home right back to the site where they started out as embryos. Coho salmon. This is a creek not too far from here. It's called Swan Creek. It's a nice place to go hiking. And from this picture, you'd never guess where it is. So on the next slide, you can see it's just surrounded by all this urban environment, all these impervious surfaces and these roads that people are constantly driving on. And in streams like Swan Creek, a lot of streams in or around the Seattle area, there's been this issue called urban runoff mortality syndrome. So this picture on the left is actually from just a couple of weeks ago at Longfellow Creek, which is up in Seattle. And that's a female salmon that we found dead on the side of the stream. And you can see she's still filled with eggs, so she never got an opportunity to spawn, likely because she died from chemical toxicity. So at the right below that, you can see these charts of rainfall through the autumn, and then the dead salmon that were counted on in different streams around the Seattle area, kind of in the 2000s. And then that map on the right shows the predicted risk to coho salmon based on impervious surface areas and then traffic volumes, which were two major factors that were trying to predict this kind of toxicity. And because there's that relationship with traffic, we went further and found that, you know, this toxicity is probably caused by stormwater runoff or something related to cars and traffic. So before I go further, I want to introduce you guys to this concept called the concentration response curve. Some of you might be familiar. It follows this kind of sigmoid curve shape, which you can see graphed on the right there. And just to point out some key concepts here, what I refer to as X in the equation is the concentration of the chemical. So that's the weight of the chemical per volume of water that it's in. And then the EC50, or I'll also use the term LC50. So E stands for effect and L stands for lethal. So EC50 would be effect concentration that affects 50% of the given population. And you can see I've charted it out there on the graph. So 0.5 or 50%, and then we go across and the EC50 is that concentration just below 100. And then, yeah, this N term relates the maximum slope of that concentration response curve. And actually a larger N refers to a shallower curve. So those are just some concepts related to these curves, and I'll be showing you guys a lot of these. So yeah, so here's a few of them. That first one in the top left is, this is from the paper where 6-butadiene was initially identified. And these are quantified 6-butadiene concentrations on the x-axis there, and then mortality. So this is an LC50 study. We're looking at the lethal effect. And you can see kind of in the same way, the LC50 there is charted out. And it was around 0.82 micrograms per liter, which is incredibly low. And this lines up really well, runoff, so stormwater runoff from urban environments, lines up extremely well with just pure 6-butadiene. This chemical in otherwise clean water. So that kind of goes to show that this chemical is probably the main cause behind the mortality that we're seeing in stormwater runoff. Those charts over on the right are showing this revision to the paper we found with more precise chemical standards about a year later, that actually this toxicity was happening at significantly lower concentrations. So we have the LC50 at 95 micrograms per liter right now. Okay, so where my work comes in is we just have these ranges of water quality conditions around the Puget Sound and in the Puyallup watershed. So these are measured water quality conditions from streams around the Puget Sound over the last year, and the density there on the y-axis is just showing you kind of the number of samples that had whichever value is on the x-axis. So, you know, we've got pHs that on average, pH is usually a little more than 7. We've got, you know, cool temperatures to kind of lukewarm up to 25 Celsius. And then, you know, usually very fresh water. So the vast majority of streams in Washington, you can see are around a conductivity of 0 microsiemens per centimeter, which is just a measurement of how salty the water is. Yeah, so to kind of test 6-butadiene toxicity, across these water quality parameters. This is just what my general exposure looks like. So I'll have a tank with 150 liters of water in it, and in each tank there's 8 coho par. And I add 6 ppd quinone, an analytical standard of the chemical, to various concentrations along a dose response curve so that I can generate one of those. And I'll take water samples across a 24-hour period of the exposure. And in the meantime, you know, I'm keeping track of how many fish are dying, looking for any symptoms. And then at the end of the exposure, I also will take tissue samples, and I'll talk later about what I do with those. So here's my results so far. I generated 2 dose response curves at 2 different temperatures. And as you can see, the LC50, you know, is quite a bit lower on that blue curve, which is at 5 degrees Celsius, which is extremely cold water. And then 20 Celsius is about as warm as water will get in this watershed. And this was the opposite of what we expected, because salmon are cold water fish, and you think that they would be facing kind of more difficult conditions for their biology at the warmer temperature. However, they managed to survive higher concentrations of the chemical at the warmer temperature. There's a few different explanations I've thought of that might make this make sense. It could be that, you know, they have some sort of enzyme in their liver, which is temperature dependent, and it begins working more effectively at that warm temperature and detoxifying the chemical. That could explain it. It could be something totally different as well, but still much more to be learned. Here, I've also added my 10 degrees Celsius curve, which is the green one there. And it's interesting, you think a temperature between 5 Celsius and 20 Celsius would lead to a response between the responses at those 2 other temperatures. But actually, the 10 degrees Celsius response aligns pretty closely with that 5 degrees Celsius curve, which I think kind of further points towards that enzymatic activity explanation that I mentioned earlier. Maybe this enzyme, you know, the way enzymes work is generally kind of, they follow this same sort of dose response pattern where they'll begin working better at like a kind of threshold. So maybe that threshold is somewhere between 10 Celsius and 20 Celsius. Okay, there's a few other water quality conditions I'm going to be looking at. So toxicity of 60 quinone alongside dissolved organic carbon. That's what this picture is here. On the left, this is a concentrated kind of stock of dissolved organic carbon that I would add to toxicity test tanks. And then also be looking at salt water and measuring concentrations of a few different ions in that salt water. As well as looking at toxicity of 60 quinone with a pH of around 6. So there's a few streams around Washington that have pretty low pH, just due to like fulvic acid, for example, comes out of a lot of our rainforests, and that could alter the toxicity of this chemical. So, okay, yeah, one of the applications of, you know, understanding 60 quinone toxicity with different water quality conditions would be, you know, I want to see how their cells are actually responding to the chemical. So not just, you know, that immediate lethal response that you can see, but how on a cellular level they're responding. So here's kind of the basic diagram of a cell. We've got DNA that gets turned into RNA, and then that RNA is translated into protein. And circled here, what we might call the transcriptome, or just the sum of all the RNA in a cell. And so from these tissue samples that I take from coho, we can look at different concentrations of different RNA sequences in individual fish. And so you can see that chart I have over there. There's 6 different fish. For my purposes, I might do 3 fish that were exposed to 60 ppd quinone and 3 fish that weren't. And we can look at RNA expression levels and how they differ between the exposure and control groups. Kind of see what the chemical is actually doing on a cellular level. Another thing I'd like to do is a risk assessment for this whole watershed. So, you know, this is a aerial photo that's been stitched together all across Pierce County, and it's looking at the color scheme here kind of allows you to see more distinctly impervious surfaces. So we can predict 6 ppb per concentrations based off of impervious surfaces and traffic volumes, and all of those things are going to be changing a lot over the next 30 years. So these are predictions for population growth by 2050. And you can see King and Pierce County have, you know, the largest predicted population growth of the 4 counties in this area. And these are, you know, the 2 counties that abut the Puyallup watershed. And a lot of this growth is going to be in these 2 most urban categories that are on this chart. So urban centers, 4 cities, we'll be seeing a lot more impervious surfaces and traffic probably over the next 30 years. We're also going to be seeing a lot of changes in our climate. So these are kind of global models for how temperature will increase, and there will also be changes in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere as well. So those will all change water quality conditions and streams around here. And knowing how that affects 6 ppb per toxicity will allow me to make some sort of risk assessment by 2050. So how is this chemical going to affect coho population health over the next 30 years? So yeah, I'd like to thank my committee members and funders and all the people that have helped me with my research so far. I think I have a little time to take questions. Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah. There will definitely be some people talking about that today.
Can you repeat the question for folks on Zoom?
Oh, yeah.
Thank
so ways of preventing 6 ppb phenomenon from getting into streams. Plants. So yeah, plants definitely help. There's also just physical, like biochar or charcoal, stormwater filters, essentially, that can prevent this water from flowing directly off of impervious surfaces into streams. So yeah, rain gardens are a great solution.
I mean, I know another toxin, copper, is associated with cars too. I understand. Great. Why you get a little copper goes in the smoke. But this compound is what is it's automotive related, obviously. But we know where in the automotive.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. It's coming from tires. Right. So there's an anti-ozonant used in car tires called 6 ppb. And ozone comes from car exhaust in high traffic areas. It's all along the surface of the roads, and it can cause cracking of tires. So they introduced 6 ppb and other PPBs to tires to prevent that damage. And then in reacting with ozone, that's when 6 ppb becomes 6 ppb. It's a great question. I'd say it's an amphipathic chemical, so it doesn't, you know, it's not super water soluble. There's people doing great work up at Tacoma looking into that exact question. In my exposure so far, I've seen that it's pretty difficult to keep in the solution, and that's why I do my exposures in 150 liters. I started out with 30 liters, and it was being taken up by the fish as well as sticking to maybe the outer tissues of the fish, and so I see, you know, this exponential loss of chemical concentration just over a 24-hour period.
All right, let's wrap that up and go on to Stephanie's talk. Thanks.
Karen. Okay, our next presenter is Stephanie Blair from Washington State University, and she's going to be talking about blood-brain barrier disruption in color salmon exposed to roadway runoff.
Everyone, again, my name is Stephanie Blair. I'm a PhD candidate here at Washington State University, Puyallup. I'm working with Dr. Jennifer McIntyre. And thank you, Garrett, for that wonderful thing. Ask for a better introduction to my work. So now you know a little bit about 6-PPD-quinone. You know that it comes from tires. And what I study is what are the biological effects. So we know that coho are the most sensitive species. So this is the model organism for me to understand. Once 6-PPD gets taken into the body, what is it doing? How is it causing damage? How is it leading to the behavioral symptoms we see in urban runoff mortality syndrome that we see out in our urban environments? And so we study that here in the lab with juvenile coho salmon. And so thanks to our partners at UW-Tacoma Center for Urban Waters, led by Ed Kaloje, we know that this chemical that's primarily causing these deaths is 6-PPD-quinone, but there is a mixture of lots of other chemicals that are coming from vehicles and roadways that we know are interacting with coho salmon to cause other biological effects. But when we expose coho to roadway runoff, we know that this chemical is primarily driving that acute mortality response. And so after doing a lot of testing, looking at their behavior, looking at the physiological effects, I focused on the blood-brain barrier as the primary target and found that it causes the blood vessels in the brain to become leaky, which leads to a loss of neuronal function and death. Now, we have been doing testing with roadway runoff across several salmoniid species, and now there's a growing body of literature on testing different species of fish to 6-PPD-quinone. And we know that sensitivity varies across species. For example, in this recent study from French et al., we know that coho are highly susceptible to roadway runoff containing 6-PPD-quinone, but sockeye are not. Chinook and steelhead do show some acute mortality response, so that they tend to be less sensitive, with steelhead being more sensitive than Chinook. So in addition to understanding how 6-PPD-quinone affects the blood-brain barrier in coho salmon, what I also want to understand is whether there might be submutual changes happening to the blood-brain barrier in these less sensitive species such as Chinook salmon. Now, sublethal effects on the blood-brain barrier may have really important implications for salmon behavior and growth and development and ultimately survival, because the brain and the spinal cord that make up the central nervous system, these are the control centers for the body. And without a functioning blood-brain barrier, that control center cannot function. The blood-brain barrier tightly regulates the microenvironment of the central nervous system, down to the smallest level of ions, so that electrical neuronal signaling can proceed uninterrupted. The blood-brain barrier itself is made up of a specialized layer of endothelial cells that form the blood vessel walls of the brain capillaries. And adjacent endothelial cells, they're firmly sealed to one another by tight junctions that prevent toxic substances from the blood from diffusing into that central nervous system. But rather than acting just as a wall or a static impermeable barrier, tight junctions serve more like a gate. So an opening of that tight junction might be beneficial under certain conditions, such as if there is any pathology or inflammation of the blood-brain barrier, that gate may need to open to allow the entry of circulating neutrophils to initiate the healing process. So another focus of my work is to examine the connections between 6-PPD-quinone exposure and inflammatory pathways that are triggers for this blood-brain barrier disruption in both coho and Chinook salmon. So we formed this hypothesis that runoff exposure may be disrupting the blood-brain barrier after noticing in several previous experiments before my work that a severe hematocrit rise was a really consistent symptom in both juvenile and adult coho that were exposed to roadway runoff. A hematocrit rise means that the blood becomes much thicker, and one reason that this could happen is through a loss of the blood plasma into tissues where those blood vessels shouldn't be leaky, such as in the brain and in the gills. So the upper left of this figure is showing in this particular study that we did see a severe hematocrit rise in the runoff exposed group relative to the controls. And we used a fluorescent tracer injection method to follow where that blood plasma might be going. And so the images that you're seeing here, these are cross sections of frozen whole juvenile coho heads after the fish had been injected with a fluorescent dye called Evans blue, and then the blood vessels were washed out with saline. The yellow highlighted regions are showing the coho brain. And in the runoff exposed coho, you can see that there's a significant accumulation of that Evans blue fluorescence in that yellow highlighted region of the brain, indicating that this tracer had leaked into those tissues. On the control side, you can see that this tracer is completely absent in the coho that were exposed to clean water because their blood-brain barriers remained intact, and that tracer was removed from the brain blood vessels during that washout step. In the imaging system used in this study, we didn't have the resolution to definitively rule out the possibility that that Evans blue fluorescence may just be trapped within those brain blood vessels. And so we followed up that study with a histology study to show that the tracer was indeed leaking out of those brain blood vessels. And what you can see here is horseradish peroxidase, which is what we used as our tracer, was again introduced into the circulation of juvenile coho that were exposed to roadway runoff or to controlled water. And then their blood vessels were washed out with fixative. After we sectioned the brains, the horseradish peroxidase was stained a dark brown. In that low magnification, you can see how that horseradish peroxidase would permeate throughout the whole brain tissue in the runoff exposed coho on the right, compared to the nearly complete absence of that brown staining in the control coho brain section on the left. And at the inset, you can see at high magnification a region of the cerebellum where it's easier to see those individual blood vessels. And in the control brain section on the left, there may be some faint brown staining that's mainly restricted to those blood vessel areas, just from residual peroxidases that are left in the blood. But in the runoff exposed group, you can see how that horseradish peroxidase, it just completely fills those spaces between those blood vessels, confirming that blood-brain barrier disruption had indeed occurred. So in the histology study, juvenile coho salmon were sampled at the loss of equilibrium stage. And this is a pretty late stage of symptom development that occurs right before death. We then wanted to know if the opening of the blood-brain barrier was triggering these behavioral symptoms such as loss of equilibrium. So then our next question was to determine whether blood-brain barrier disruption was concurrent with the behavioral phenotype of coho that were exposed to roadway runoff by assessing the timing and the severity of the tracer accumulation in their brains. And so the behavioral phenotype is the progression of symptoms that leads up to death that begins with sustained surface swimming, which occurs in about 3 hours after exposure, and then transitions quickly to the loss of equilibrium that can be seen here in the video. That's right at that transition point. A severe hematocrit rise also is frequently observed at that loss of equilibrium stage. The behaviors indicate that the coho could be experiencing cardiovascular and neurological damage from that surfacing, that behavior that they're suffocating, that they need to get oxygen through their body, and then not being able to orient or be able to figure out which way is up from down in the water. So in this study, we sampled coho at 3 runoff exposure endpoints. The first was a pre-symptomatic group that were sampled after 3 hours of exposure, but just prior to the onset of those surfacing symptoms. In the second group, they were sampled at the onset of sustained surfacing, and then the final third group was sampled at that loss of equilibrium stage. And the goal here was to see whether we see a consistent onset of blood-brain barrier disruption at one of these symptom stages. And then to assess the severity of blood-brain barrier disruption, we used a mixture of both high and low molecular weight tracers. So fluorescein is a pretty small molecule. It is about 376 Daltons, and it indicates for permeability to ions and small molecules through the blood-brain barrier. And TRITC dextrin, it has a much larger molecular weight of 65,000 to 85,000 Daltons. And so this is roughly the size of large molecules and proteins in the blood. Brain accumulation of just fluorescein would indicate for only a slight opening of the blood-brain barrier, but a severe opening would be indicating by the accumulation of both of these tracers. So we collected runoff with our partners at Watershed from a high traffic section of State Route 16 in Tacoma, Washington, which was frozen in stainless steel carboys. And then the runoff was thawed the night before the experiments and then diluted to 50% with fish rearing water. Tank water samples were then collected just prior to the exposures for 6 ppb quinone quantification. And then for this study, at each exposure endpoint, the fish were induced under anesthesia with MS-222, and then a mixture of these high molecular weight tracers were injected into their hearts. And that tracer was allowed to circulate for a period of about 15 minutes before the blood vessels were then washed out with saline. If the blood-brain barrier was compromised, then that brain tissue would soak up that tracer like a sponge. And that saline washout step removes all of the tracer from the blood vessels so that when the brains are dissected and removed, and the brains are homogenized, and what we're quantifying at that point is the amount of tracer that had leaked out of the blood vessels, and that is in that brain functional tissue. So here are the results for the brain fluorescein content, which is the low molecular weight tracer, which is shown on the y-axis. And then the x-axis is showing the exposure groups in order of exposure time. And just to reiterate, any tracer fluorescence that is above that nominal amount found in the control group on the far left of this figure is indicating for blood-brain barrier disruption. In that pre-symptomatic group, 2 out of the 6 cohort that were tested did show some tracer accumulation in their brains. So this does indicate that blood-brain barrier disruption can occur just prior to those surfacing symptom development. But for most of the cohort in that pre-symptomatic group, we see an absence of that tracer accumulation. It's really at that onset of those surfacing symptoms that's where we see a consistent opening of the blood-brain barrier and an accumulation of that tracer. And then for TRITC dextrin, we see the same pattern here. Indicates that that opening of the blood-brain barrier at the onset of those surfacing symptoms is in fact severe, letting through large molecules such as proteins from the blood into that brain tissue. The mean concentration of 6 ppb quinone that we measured in the runoff tanks was 522 nanograms per liter, which is well above the established LC50 of 95 nanograms per liter for coho. So we can surmise that 6 ppb quinone was the chemical responsible for changes to the blood-brain barrier and for the coho deaths. And then in a pilot study, we gathered more direct evidence that 6 ppb quinone was driving the blood-brain barrier disruption. So juvenile coho here were exposed to nominal concentrations of 6 ppb quinone that was dissolved in clean water. And those concentrations range from 113 to 140 nanograms per liter. And the coho that reached that loss of equilibrium stage were then sampled and then injected again with that mixture of high and low molecular weight tracers. And so this figure is showing the results for fluorescein. And you can see that the loss of equilibrium coho exposed to just 6 ppb quinone also showed that same accumulation of this tracer in their brains. And like the blood-brain barrier, the blood-gill barrier is also a region of the fish vascular system that should not be permeable. And we did observe, to our surprise, that these tracers that were injected into their hearts could be seen leaking out of the gills. So this could be another reason why we see such a severe hematocrit rise at that blood plasma is not just being lost, from being soaked into the brain tissue, but also could be leaving the body through the gills. In previous studies, no overt changes to gill morphology were found before, so we surmise that damage to the gill epithelia is an unlikely explanation for leaking, but rather the same or similar pathways to a systemic inflammatory response may be responsible for the opening of those barriers. So just to recap, the blood-brain barrier disruption, it does really closely follow symptom development in co-exposed to roadway runoff, which begins at that surfacing stage or even just prior. And blood-gill barrier opening may also be very pathologically relevant to cause of death. An important follow-up to this study is we're going to evaluate also sublethal effects in juvenile fall Chinook salmon, and we plan on doing this by examining the changes in genetic expression of several inflammatory and blood-brain barrier regulatory proteins in both coho and Chinook using RT-qPCR techniques. So I'd like to give a special thanks to everyone who helped with this study, and I'd also welcome a few questions as long as you have time. Yeah, so the question was, are there other types of chemicals that we know that cause leaking in the blood-brain barrier? To find other chemicals that may be a good replacement for 6-PPD phenol, is that right? Avoid ones that have the same impact. Well, so there is not a lot of literature on environmental chemicals that cause blood-brain barrier leaking in fish. So that's why it was a really difficult problem for a long time for our research group to figure out what was happening to the fish. They looked completely healthy. The fish that were out there, that groups like Puget Sound Keepers are doing spawning surveys, and they open up female carcasses that are full of eggs. But that looks beautiful. Otherwise, perfectly healthy, normal condition. So it seemed that nothing was making sense in terms of all known causes of fish mortality didn't seem to be at play in what was happening with the coho mortality. So it was a mystery for a while. It was just the hematocrit rise that gave us that clue to check for blood-brain barrier disruption. But it's not because there's a lot of literature on that. It just was the only thing that kind of fits and makes sense. So there's a real gap in knowledge on how environmental chemicals affect the blood-brain barrier as a target. The literature that I used to develop the techniques here was based on mammalian studies, because there is an incredible depth of literature on the blood-brain barrier, but from a biomedical pharmaceutical standpoint, to try to get drug delivery to get through the blood-brain barrier to the brain. So we know a lot about those pathways and how it works. We know that there's a lot of highly conserved proteins and pathways between species because the blood-brain barrier is so important. So that literature is very pertinent to from other organisms to look at what's happening in the because this, there are differences between species. We're really not sure how that plays out to why coho are more sensitive than in other species. So no, I would not say that there's enough information to really say that we know enough about how those chemicals are affecting the blood-brain barrier to avoid them. I would suspect, as we applied these types of methods that I used here to check for blood-brain barrier disruption as a cause of death, or as a type of pathology from a chemical exposure, I would think that we would see it happening from other types of chemicals too. And it would be a good future area of study.
All right. We'll call it good there. Thanks.
Stephanie. Our third presenter is going to be Anish Mahat, and he's going to be talking about optimizing placement of bioretention systems in the U.S. Puget Sound region.
Hi everyone. First, I'd like to thank the country for providing this opportunity to present my work over here. And also I'd like to thank everyone for being here and hearing us out. My research is about optimizing the placement of bioretention systems in the US South Puget Sound. It is one of the potential solutions for the problem that has been raised here in past two presentations. I'm Anish Mahat. In my research team, I have Dr. Zanu and Dr. Ananjay Karan. So it is evident that rapid urbanization is adversely affecting aquatic ecosystem and hydrologic quality. And researchers have shown that sustainable management practices are being followed to reduce the stormwater effect. And one such strategy is green stormwater infrastructure that includes bioretention system. And based on my literature review, I have found that location is very critical for the effectiveness of bioretention system. So one of the objectives in my study was to adopt the hydrologic sensitivity index approach and develop guidelines for placing the bioretention system in the lower Puyallup River watershed based on publicly accessible geospatial data. And the other objective was to assess the adequacy of the method based on ground truthing, where soil samples were also collected to examine the link between the soil measured physical properties and the index. Briefly talking about the study area, it is lower Puyallup River watershed, which covers an area of 129 kilometers square. The land use in this watershed is mixed type, with majority of land being covered by urban land use, almost 82%. The climate over here is warm summer Mediterranean, according to the Copenhagen classification. And the elevation in the watershed ranges from -9 to 198 meters above the mean sea level. In the watershed, the major drainage is the Puyallup River and its tributaries. My whole study is based on the approach where I have followed the concept of variable source area hydrology, which led to the development of hydrologic sensitivity index, often implemented in a GIS program. I have used ArcGIS. Briefly talking about VSA hydrology, it is a concept that a large portion of runoff exiting a watershed originates from a relatively small portion of the watershed. I've been talking about hydrologic sensitivity index in my previous slide, so what it really is. It is an index that expresses the likelihood of a location to generate runoff and is related to two other sub-indices. One is topographic wetness index, which deals with the contribution of topography to saturation and runoff generation. And the other part of the index is the soil water storage capacity index, which deals with the ability of soil to receive and store water. If we take a look at the picture over here, we see the distribution of red stars, which are the representation of hydrologically sensitive hotspots. So in my study, I have tried to find these hotspots where we believe placing a bioretention system will help us fighting the stormwater effect. For my study, I have made use of publicly accessible data. The data layers that were used in the study are high resolution DM, impervious surface layer, land cover data layer, soil properties data layers, road, water bodies, building, erosion hazard, and park layers. The structural geometry and the source of the data layer used is shown in the table over here. Most of the work was carried out on GIS. Also, all the structural data were processed in ArcGIS program. Using the high resolution DM, slope beta and contributing area alpha was calculated. Using ArcGIS plugin called soil data viewer, soil properties, that is soil saturated hydraulic conductivity and soil depth to restitutive layer was extracted. After having alpha, beta, KS, and D, the indices, topographic wetness index, soil water storage capacity index, and hydrologic sensitivity index was calculated using the equation as shown on the slide over here. After having the index map, unsuitable areas that included forest, wetland, erosion-prone regions, impervious areas were filtered out. Also, I listed a set of engineering criteria based on the stormwater manual and the EPA fact sheet. to better identify the suitable locations for the placement of biodiesel system. Those criteria included slope being less than 8%, hydraulic conductivity being greater than 0.18 meter per day, so depth to restrictive layer being greater than 1.52 meter, and drainage area in between 0.4 to 4 hectare. After developing the suitability map, the map was classified into 3 quantile groups, low, medium, and high, to enable better random sampling. We plan to visit 75 sites, such that 25 sites would fall in each categories, low, medium, and high HSI category. During the ground truthing, adequacy of the spatial analysis that was carried on GIS was verified. Site suitability was checked based on visual assessment. Space availability was checked on each site. Soil samples were collected and analyzed for hydraulic properties. Also, infiltration test was carried out on 9 sites, so that 3 sites would fall in each low, medium, and high HSI categories. The map over here shows the distribution of the location where I went for the soil sample collection and ground truthing work. These are a few photographs that were taken during the ground truthing work. After the soil analysis results were obtained, correlation analysis was carried out between the indices and soil properties. Measure and sort to obtain hydraulic conductivity data. Since soil depth was same on all the sample side or ground truth side, it was not included in the correlation analysis. Moving on to the result section. The first map over here shows the distribution of the topographic wetness index in the study area, where the index ranges from -0.2 to 29.9. The second map over here shows the distribution of soil water storage scarcity index, where the index ranges from -3.4 to 4.2. And the third map over here shows the distribution of hydrologic sensitivity index, where the index ranges from -3.7 to 28.4 with a mean of 5.7 and the standard deviation of 4.1. After removing the unsuitable areas and applying the engineering criteria, the HSI range narrowed down to 6 to 20.4. Approximately 2.5% of the watershed was identified as suitable for the placement of biodiesel system. As also can be seen on the map, that the suitable sites are fairly evenly distributed. And what else can be seen is that the central and northern part of the watershed have most sites with high HSI. Moving on to the result of ground truthing. Ground truthing shows that it is largely agreeable with the HSI spatial analysis carried out on the GIS. Pervious and impervious areas on the map were actually pervious and impervious on the ground also. There was availability of space for construction of biodiesel system in each ground truth sites. The slope steepness criteria was made. We also made a field visit after the rainfall event, and we saw that the locations that had low HSI had no runoff or no surface pooling. The location that had medium HSI had medium to low runoff and low surface pooling, whereas the location that had high HSI had high surface pooling and high surface runoff. And infiltration results shows that 8 out of 9 infiltration sites exhibited hydraulic conductivity greater than 0.18 meter per day, meeting the engineering criteria. Soil sample analysis results shows that there is a considerable variation in the measured soil properties, and the dominant soil texture is sandy loam in the analyzed soils, and other texture being loamy sand, and silt. The table over here shows the descriptive statistic of all the soil parameters that were measured. Going on to the correlation analysis, the heat map over here shows the correlation that exists in between the different index parameters and soil measured physical properties. From the heat map, it is seen that HSI is significantly correlated with its sub-indices TWI and SWIC. It is also seen that TWI is significantly correlated with alpha and tan beta, whereas SWIC is significantly correlated with KS. It is also seen that SWIC is significantly correlated with soil physical properties. It could be because KS, the component of SWIC, is significantly correlated with theta% sand and % clay. However, the correlation between the soil properties and HSI was not seen. The reason could be there's a lot of randomness associated with these soil properties that was measured, And also, the hydraulic conductivity data layer that was used in the study was not very detailed. Sorry for this. It's not right.
Try that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Coming on to the conclusion, based on my experience and based on what I have learned, I can say the indexing approach that has been used in this study is very straightforward and easy to implement in GIS. The framework developed in this study can be applied to any other watershed for which there is data available for the data layers that have been used in the index calculation. The findings of this study has direct relevance to the study watershed. The locations more suitable for bioretention system are generally the central and northern part of the watershed. And if there is the limitation of resources, if there are budget constraints or less availability of land, we recommended choosing location falling in high HSI category, since these locations contribute more to runoff generation and urban flooding. So this is it. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take it. Yeah. Right. So we use a very high
Can you repeat
resolution.
the question, please?
Okay, sir. So see, I use a land cover data layer that has a resolution of 40 meter by 30 meters. So does that limit my study? That was your question. Yes, it definitely does limit the study. Like the higher the resolution, the better it is. I have used a very high resolution DBM impervious layer. So if I could, if I had a high resolution land cover, then it would have been nice. But we made the best use of what we have.
Okay, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has 1 meter by 1 meter, higher than land cover data, so it might be something you can consider adding.
Thank you so much. I didn't have that information. Definitely, we can use that for the better outcome. Anyone? Okay, yeah. I have a poster over there, so if anyone has questions later on, we can talk about my research during the poster viewing session also. Thank you.
Thank you, Anish, for filling in at the last minute. Okay, our last speaker is coming to us from California. She's Claire Todd from California State University, San Francisco. And she'll be on, is she going to be on Zoom?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Excellent. So I'm trying, oh, did I not share my screen? Okay, forgive me. Let me see if I can get this done. Okay. All right, let's try that. Okay, can you see my screen?
Nope, hang on a second.
Okay.
This is where it gets fun. All right, let's see. And Robbie, if you want to pop over here too, you're my tech guy. See if we can figure this out. What do we do? So wait, we can see it here, but for some reason it's not projecting on the front screen. Great, because we actually have a few minutes extra to spare.
Sorry, let me try to. Well, I think this will share. No. Try again, Claire, if you can,
Okay, no problem.
and we'll see if we need to make you.
She's co-host.
Okay, you are a co-host, so we'll see if that.
The issue is not on your end, Claire, just so you know, it's on ours.
Okay.
No, it's still showing. It's still showing
What
that.
is it? Let's try.
Advanced sharing maybe.
Let's just do it for now. Share, and
Yeah, here. Let's
I
also.
think that's gonna work.
Is there a way to change? How did you change it earlier? So when it was doing the thing, like how'd you fix it when it was showing the presentation wrong earlier? Maybe do that again, but do the opposite side.
So what happened is, okay, see, this would stop her.
Sorry, we tried to share that. I shared earlier from mine and it worked.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit the stop share, Claire, again. Sorry about that.
Oh,
We're gonna
no
just try
problem.
something
No
else.
problem.
So what would happen is there'd be like duplicates that would show up here. And I would have to, oh, it's this one. Okay, now try it again, Claire.
Okay.
Still showing that.
That's because this is still filming. She's not sharing this screen yet. It's gonna work.
Here, try closing PowerPoint maybe. Or is
Yeah,
it's just on, it's just open.
Yeah.
Is this one good to close?
Yep. There we go.
Yay.
There we go.
Excellent. And I saw in the chat that maybe people on Zoom can't hear me very well. How's volume for everybody? Everything okay? Can everyone in the room hear me now?
Good to go, Claire.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm sorry I don't get to be with you all today. But yes, I'm speaking from sunny Southern California. I'm Claire Todd, professor and chair of geological sciences at Cal State San Bernardino. And in my previous professional life, I was at Pacific Lutheran University and got to spend a lot of time working with undergraduate students on Mount Rainier. And I love Watershed symposiums because it makes you appreciate how complicated it is to think about watershed health. There's so many different components to be thinking about. So for this presentation, we'll be heading to the headwaters of the Puyallup watershed, focusing specifically on Emmons Glacier. And I just want to, before I go a step further, really emphasize that what I will show you today is the result of work with so many fantastic students at PLU for many years and now at Cal State San Bernardino. External funding, lots of great folks at Mount Rainier National Park, some private funding sources, as well as great colleagues, particularly Michelle Kutnick at the University of Washington. So too many names to fit on this slide, but science doesn't happen alone. So I really feel grateful that I get to work with such wonderful people. So we're going to spend time today thinking about Emmons Glacier. And Emmons Glacier is worth thinking about for a lot of reasons, but sort of perhaps the easiest one to start with is that it's one of the largest glaciers on Mount Rainier, 11 square kilometers, and over a quarter of it is covered by rocky debris. So one of the phrases I'll use in this talk is the phrase debris cover. And what I'm really thinking of when I say that word is this sort of layer of, or blanket of, if you will, rocky debris that covers the lower parts of some of the glaciers on Mount Rainier. The other word that I'll be using a lot is terminus, which is really just where the glacier terminates. And you can see it here, this ice face marks where the glacier comes to an end. And so I'll be using that phrase as well. And this is a very special picture when we're thinking about the watershed, because that meltwater stream right there is the birth of the White River, which, as we know, is a major tributary. So this is a wonderful place, accessible by the Glacier Basin Trail and Emmons Moraine Trail. If you want a tour next summer, look me up. I'd be happy to walk here with you. It's a special place. And so, we've heard a lot of talks already today about, things relating to salmon, things relating to, runoff retention. So why on earth might we think about sort of the headwaters of this magnificent watershed? And, there are a lot of reasons that pop up if you read much scientific literature on this topic. First of all, that glaciers are a source of cold water. which is essential during summer months, as well as maintaining stream levels during dry, hot summer months. So that they can sort of moderate seasonality, which is important for species such as salmon, as well as other species. And also that there are predictions that the timing and the amount of glacial meltwater production is expected to change. And so understanding what's happening in the headwaters, I think, is worthwhile. I'm also biased. I'm a glacial geologist by training. So when I think about the watershed, I think about those glaciated headwaters. So Emmons Glacier is one of several debris-covered glaciers that supply meltwater to the watershed. So I know this map has been around for a while. I still find it quite useful. One of the things to notice is that so many glaciers on Mount Rainier deliver meltwater to the Puyallup watershed. It truly is a mighty watershed. And when we look at a satellite image, so that's what we're looking at here, and you'll see what I like to call the starfish multiple times in this talk. You're looking at the crater at the summit of Mount Rainier here in the center, this white glaciated summit. And then we see all of the glaciers radiating down from that summit. And so Emmons Glacier here in the northeast, but it's not the only large debris-covered glacier that sends water to the Puyallup watershed. We have the Winthrop Glacier, we have Carbon Glacier, Tahoma Glacier over here. So there are lots of sort of glacial sources for the Puyallup watershed. So kind of key questions that I want to address in this talk, and by address, I mean discuss, not necessarily answer. I have direct evidence for the first question: what changes do we observe at Emmons Glacier? And then I have some ideas for the second question, which is what impacts might these changes in the headwaters have on the watershed? But I do not have any definitive answers for that second question. And to me, that represents an opportunity for all of us to think about going forward. So what changes have been observed at Emmons Glacier? Significant loss. So over the 20th century, this is a map put together by Scott Beeson at the National Park. And he's working on a new set of these with updated imagery. But this graph you're looking at here is simply showing the decline across the 20th century of the surface area of Emmons Glacier. And so this map here at the right, you have the crater, and then you have the glacier here with brown representing its debris cover. What does that look like? If we were to sort of travel back in time, I just have one attempt at a repeat photograph to show you. So here is the summit of Mount Rainier, Little Tahoma, Frying Pan Glacier, and here's Emmons Glacier. And if you haven't ever checked this out, Portland State has a wonderful set of photographs from glaciers across the American West, and Mount Rainier, they've got a great section on Mount Rainier. So here, I picked one from 1942, and this here on the left, this sort of face that you can see here, and rubble, all of this in the middle here, all of this to the right, this is all Emmons Glacier in 1942. So I had a wonderful student in 2021 named Luis, and here we are standing at very roughly the same place with Mount Ruth and Goat Island Mountain here on the left. And what you can see is, of course, everything that we see in this picture up here is gone. So I wanted to give you a visual for what does significant ice loss look like. It uncovers sediment, it uncovers habitat. And so there's lots of evidence of this, but I thought this visual was particularly helpful. So the other thing that we observe, in addition to just sort of ice loss in general, is there are different ways to measure it. And these are data from the later part of the 20th century, showing differences in surface elevation from 1970 to 2007 and 2008. And so this map is copied from an article by Sisson et al. And it is showing thickness change, where red indicates significant loss in glacier thickness. So here's your starfish again. I have a happy little red arrow here showing you Emmons Glacier. And interestingly, despite the 20th century signal of loss, this study showed that actually parts of Emmons Glacier had thickened by tens of meters. And one of the sort of attributions of this change was that debris cover, that rocky blanket that covers the lower portion of the glacier. And so, that's an important question for us. And when we think about sort of the context of a warming climate, these debris covered glaciers, can we rely on that cover to prevent or slow ice melt? And this is not a new idea. As early as sort of the mid 20th century, people were trying to measure this so that debris cover thickness, how much is there, can either slow melting if it's really thick, effectively insulating the ice, or if it's really thin, it can accelerate melting. A thin layer of rocks heats up and that accelerates melt. And with students like ones pictured here, we've actually measured that debris cover and found that on Emmons, there's a wide range. So debris cover can be very thick, greater than 1 meter. One might suggest that would insulate the glacier. And then, or it can be very thin, 10 meters, 0 to 10 meters, 0 to 10 centimeters, which might accelerate that melting. And so the other kind of interesting feature that we see is that meltwater is not just coming from the glacier below the glacier, but also from these streams that we can find in the glacier surface where we see really thin debris cover. We see this production of glacial meltwater in that glacier surface as well. And so we wanted to measure, okay, what is the recent ice loss? So after recent studies, what kind of ice loss do we see in the debris covered areas of Emmons Glacier? And so again, here's your crater for reference. We're just focused here on Emmons Glacier. And in the next slide, I'll show you a map view of this debris covered area here. So your glacier outline is sort of even with the end of these colorful bumpy lines, which are elevation data points. Here we have the glacier terminus at the top of the slide, and there we have the beginning of the White River right there. And I've worked with students. This is a former PLU student, both measuring debris cover thickness. You can see the shovel. It's glamorous work. And then also measuring the surface elevation of the glacier. And what we find is that if we compare it to that 2007-2008 data set from the previous study I showed, we actually see that in areas, we know we have thicker debris cover at the edge. We know we have thinner debris cover in the middle based on student measurements, but it turns out it doesn't matter. So this black line is the surface elevation from the data set published by Sisson et al. So elevation here on the y-axis, and then distance across the glacier on the x-axis. There is some vertical exaggeration. We're looking at the elevation transect closest to the glacier terminus. And what we see is that, in fact, that no matter where you are on the glacier, no matter how much debris is there, we're seeing ice loss approaching 50 meters at a maximum. And if we look at this surface elevation profile farther up the glacier, where we see, again, a range of debris thicknesses, no matter where you are on the glacier, from 2008 to 2018, if you had been able to fast forward through time in that decade, you would have lowered. So the debris cover is not actually doing enough to prevent ice melt. And so this is a study by Menounos et al., published in 2018. You're looking at 3 images here. This one all the way on the right is 2000 to 2018, but they broke it up into 2 different decades. So you can see the difference. In the 2009, 2018, some heavy precipitation led to more ice, but overall in that trend, we saw loss even in debris covered areas. So in addition to thinning ice, which I hope I've now made a case for you that the ice is definitely sort of deflating underneath that debris cover, we also continue to see terminus retreat like we did in the 20th century. So I'm going to show you a series of images on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you just watch the right-hand side of this screen, you'll see the glacier terminus retreat. So from 2006, 2009, you're watching this debris covered mass here retreat, particularly in this center line. So we have, sorry, my phone's ringing. I keep having to hang it up. So we have, basically, we're watching this terminus retreat here on the right. And so you can see that we see a deepening of the glacier here where the White River is emerging. So again, I'll go through those more quickly. We see basically this terminus retreat happening here. And so even at the terminus, we're seeing significant ice loss. So what do these changes mean for the Puyallup watershed? As a glacial geologist, I've shown you sort of a sampling of data. I've given you an idea. Okay, the glacier is retreating, but this is not a glacier symposium. It's a watershed symposium. So what do these changes mean? And the reality is there are so many unknowns. So most of the citations I'm about to show you are not focused on the Puyallup watershed specifically, but here's some things we might expect. So in a warming climate, glaciated areas might initially see an increase in meltwater production as temperatures rise and we get more ice loss. But over time, in the long run, we would see a substantial decrease in meltwater supply as we have a smaller and smaller supply of snow and ice. The watershed might experience reduced summer flow and increased stream temperatures once we get to that regime where the glaciers are small enough that they really are providing a significantly decreased amount of melt. So reduced flow, increased stream temperatures. Sediment supply is another big question, and I think the verdict is still out. So it's possible that as we have less glacial erosion happening under a smaller glacier, that amount of glacial erosion is decreasing. So perhaps there would be less sediment. Or as that glacier is retreating, that there might be more loose material uncovered. So that might deliver more sediment into the watershed. Or perhaps no change. Are things that happen in front of Emmons Glacier, do they even get communicated and transported all the way down into the lower watershed? Perhaps not. The other thing to think about is that glaciers are sources of specific nutrients, specific microbial activity, and those will change. The amount of those nutrients will change as we see a reduced glacier area. This is outside of my area of expertise, but definitely something that's been tracked in other watersheds. So there will be hydrologic and ecosystem impacts. In particular, I think we've seen some presentations on salmon. I think there will be pressures on the salmon habitat in the long run simply from glacial change, in addition to other factors. But the exact nature and timing of these changes is really uncertain. And so I think that, again, an opportunity for future research and discussion as we think about how the changes at the headwaters are connected to the rest of the glacier. Excuse me, the rest of the watershed. So thank you for listening. I'm sorry I'm not there with you. I would love to take any questions, and I've left my email at the bottom of the slide. I hope you can see it, because I would be delighted to continue these conversations with people who are interested. So thank you so much.
If there's questions, I might be able to bring the microphone over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Wonderful talk. I was wondering, you mentioned the debris cover was causing the thickening of the terminus of the glacier. I was wondering, could you just describe what processes cause that debris thickening to happen?
Yes, and I think so, and that is really a signal from this study here, and where they measured basically changes from 1970 to 2007, 2008, and so they took from a topographic map data in 1970, and then they compared that to LIDAR data, basically airborne elevation data, and saw the difference. And so the thickening, the idea behind this thickening, and I would say one explanation would be the debris cover. One thing that happened right before that topographic data was collected in 1970 was there was a big rock slide on Emmons Glacier. And so a lot of sediment dumped at one time. And the idea is that, and we actually see this in other data that I just didn't share it today. If you dig a pit down into the debris cover, so you're standing on the debris cover, you're digging a pit, digging a pit, digging a pit. The top of that debris is really hot on a sunny day, but the bottom of that debris is cold. And actually, if you get sort of, tens of centimeters to a meter of debris, you're really protecting that ice from melt that occurs due to solar radiation. And so you may still have supply of snow and ice from the upper part of the mountain. Snow falls in the upper part of the mountain, flows to the lower glacier. And as it gets to the lower glacier, it has a debris cover that in the past may have been actually insulating that ice and keeping it from melting due to exposure to the sun. But actually what we're finding in more recent years, unfortunately, is that is no longer the trend that we see. I hope that's clear enough.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you so much, Claire.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I want to congratulate all the presenters for staying within their time limit. They're right on time. we're going to take a break. A little early. Please enjoy some more snacks. Oh, and I had a question that not everyone knew where the rest. McAvoy, and she's from the Pierce Conservation District. And her presentation is going to be inspiring and supporting the next generation of farmers. Listen.
I'm gonna try hooking this on my jacket, so I don't have to hold it. So, can you still hear me?
Not as well.
Not as well. Okay. I'll do my best. All right. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. A lot of folks that I've not met and some folks that I just haven't seen in a long time. So it's nice to be at an in-person event. I am Kristen. I'm with the Pierce Conservation District. I am the least qualified person on my team to be presenting about these programs, but the program manager is on maternity leave and the program coordinator, who's also one of the farmers, is in Guatemala. So you have me, and I'll do my best, but there are folks on my team who work more closely to these programs on the ground that are doing really awesome work. We could go to the next slide. So I'm really going to talk about, this is a very different style presentation than all the other ones we've heard so far today. I have 0 charts. I have lots of pretty pictures, so it can give your brain a little rest from tracking all the acronyms and the units of measurement. So for those of you that are familiar, I'm the program director of Harvest Pierce County. We are a program of the Pierce Conservation District, and we focus on the community agriculture side of things. We have a community garden program, and there are 91 community gardens throughout Pierce County. They're all a little different, and we work to support and encourage folks to participate in growing their food and sharing their food and kind of learning about organic agriculture and how to participate in the local food system. We also have what we call our gleaning program, and that focuses on harvesting food that would otherwise go to waste. There's a big component of that harvests backyard fruit trees and also works with our local farms in partnership to harvest food that would not make it to market or would otherwise go to waste. And so we organize volunteers to make all that happen. And then when those two programs came together, back 2013, 2014, those two programs kind of came into our organization. They got together, and then we birthed this other program that we called our farm programming, which is essentially in the very beginning just a large scale community garden that operated similar to a small scale farm. And we did that for several years, and the food grew and went to the food banks and into the local school districts, primarily one that we have in partnership with the Franklin Pierce School District. But we were getting feedback from our participants that what they really wanted was a farmer training program. People really wanted to engage in small scale agriculture and wanted some more support in figuring out how to do this. And so the connection here to like Watershed Health is sustainable agriculture is an important part of that. And there's a lot of things that are necessary to sustain and protect farmland in a watershed, but one of them is farmers. And so we have really been working to grow farmers and farmers that care about environmental conservation and that practice sustainable agriculture, and also working to try and address some of the historic inequities in our current farming system in terms of who has access to those opportunities. And so we really tried to build this program and create an equitable opportunity for people who are interested to access the opportunity to become food producers in this county. So we launched our Farm Foundations program in 2018. And so the idea was this, we were hearing from folks that they wanted to try farming, but it didn't feel accessible because most people don't have the opportunity to quit their job and go intern on a farm for very low pay to kind of see if it's going to work for them. And so we wanted to create an opportunity that was accessible to people who needed to kind of keep a job. And so we scaled it to 5 hours a week. And so we were going to do on-farm training from February to October. We also do a classroom component that starts in February and goes through May and then picks up again in October. So there was the science, in a PowerPoint, direct to education, but then there was the opportunity to put it into practice and get your hands dirty and be out in the wet and cold and do all the things that a farm does. We partner with the Franklin Pierce School District. They're just right over there. They have a piece of property called The Farm. And it is, it's a school, and so there are students that participate in the agriculture through their schooling as part of Franklin Pierce School District, but they also have a very vibrant community partnership program, and we are a big part of that. So we get our students, our participants out on the farm, and they help with all that work, and the food goes back to the community. Anyone who wants it can go to that farm and get food, and it goes into the school cafeteria, it goes into several school lunch programs that happen during the summer, and it's just there and available for all the volunteers that happen on the farm. And even if you don't have time or capacity to volunteer, you can just go and they'll give you food. So they're very serious about having the resource that is public land, that is a farm in Pierce County, be something that grows food that is available to anybody to use it. And so we have participated in supporting that happen since the beginning. And then as we have grown this program around farm foundations, we really also tried to build a community aspect into that. We build and work with a cohort model. So we recruit people through an application process and then invite them to participate in the whole season and really focus on the relationship building between our cohort, and then also really work to help that cohort meet and become in relationship with the local food system. So we have a lot of our local farmers come in and do talks. We do farm tours. I think we do 10 every summer, where we go and take the students to the farms where they can see all the different models of how small farms are successful in Pierce County. And really trying to build that sense of community and those relationships that will help people be in community, which is what people say is important, and also be successful in their endeavors as producers. And we've heard reports from folks as we've done surveys of the programming that that's one of the most important things that they get from our program. We've based our curriculum on the University of California, Santa Cruz. They're well known in the sustainable ag world, and also connected it to a lot of our local resources. And like I said, a lot of our other local successful producers are teachers in the program. And the program, and I've mentioned a lot of this, but it's really built on these values of equitable opportunities and really trying to address what we see as historical inequities in terms of who has had the opportunity historically to own land, to be a farmer in this part of the world. And so we're wanting to inspire this next generation of food producers and cultivate and support them to enter it. And we're hoping that it looks different than the current generation. If you look at the current generation of folks who are farm owners, not just in Pierce County, but nationally, it's a very old and very white group of people. There's a whole lot of other folks that have not had historically that opportunity. And if you look at the cohorts that we have been recruiting over the last several years, they have gotten more and more diverse, that there's a lot of interest from a lot of different folks who want to participate in this type of work. And as I said, I really feel like there's a lot of people working to grow and support a local food system here in the South Sound and in the Puyallup Watershed and in Pierce County. But having the farmers to participate in that is an important piece. So that's kind of where we're focusing. And being the conservation district, of course, we're teaching sustainable agriculture. So that wanting all the farming that's happening to grow and improve the soil and the soil quality and the water quality throughout the county. So 2018 was our first year. We graduated 12 people, plus one person that then came back and was our AmeriCorps the next year, launched 4 farms. 3 additional members went on to work for other local farms. And then 1 member went to create a sustainable ag program at the Giadroni Middle School. There's over 60 students a year enrolled in her program. So it was a really, we had a lot of interest, and a lot of folks really went on to do cool things. We continued, the next year we had a bigger applicant pool, more graduates and more new farms happening in our community. We began this partnership with the Mother Earth Farm, but if you're not familiar, it's a project of the Emergency Food Network, where it's an organic farm and all the food that's grown moves back into the emergency food system. So we began a partnership with them and had some of our graduates grow there as well as kind of a pilot project, because they wanted more land and we didn't really have it to give them, but there was some extra land there, and so they began kind of practicing. I'll talk more about that need for practice in a little bit here, but they began kind of their farm, and the food went back into the emergency food system. And we've also begun kind of training some of our own internal staff at PCE And so folks have been able to kind of get this training as well. As you all know, 2020 and 2021 were weird years. So we started the year strong. We were so optimistic. Everything was going to be so exciting. We had over 60 applicants. We accepted 30 into our cohort. Our most diverse cohort yet. We had a third of the cohort identifying as POC, and 27 of those 30 were either women or non-binary people. And so we were very happy with our diversity. And then COVID happened and everything went on Zoom, and we were basically not able to do the farm component of the program because Franklin Pierce closed themselves to outside volunteer groups for a period of time. And so we basically had to split that cohort like into 2 years, and we lost a lot of folks in the process for obvious reasons. And then when we did do the second year, we just did the on-farm component, but we did select a small cohort who all of them finished the year. And so I think it really demonstrated that strength of the cohort model and the small connections that people were forming, and 2 of them have successfully gone on to start farm businesses. So then we back up and functional for 2022. But in the middle of all this, we were getting a lot of feedback from folks that they really were thrilled with this opportunity and excited to like become farmers and needed help figuring out what next. And so we had been tossing around this idea of like the Farm Foundations 2.0. Like, okay, now what? People really want to become farmers, and it's still not easy now that they're trained. It's still not easy to access farmland and to kind of figure out how to become a successful small farmer. So we took this problem to PCC Farmland Trust Farm to Farmer program and talked with them about it, and became inspired by programs that happen around the country that are called farm incubators. And so we're trying to figure out how to create a farm incubator and on what land, and we began looking around. And it didn't take long. And we were paired with WSU Extension and the property that they own out, basically the intersection of Highway 162 and Pioneer. So if you just go straight up the road till it dead ends, you basically get there. There's a research farm called the Goss Farm. WSU is consolidating some of its research up at the Mount Vernon station. And so there was some land that had become available. So I'm speeding up a very long and tedious drawn out process. Sounds exciting. But we got a lease and we have now installed water. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself, just trying to make it sound exciting. So we began the process of starting this program. And so modeling it after a program at a conservation district just outside of Portland. They have a similar program where they have 60 acres and call it the Headwaters Farm because it's on the headwaters of some important body of water that I don't remember right now. And the model is essentially to provide quarter-acre plots to beginning farmers and then allow them to be there for several years and size up over time so that they can get their systems in place and get their business model figured out so they can then have the confidence to go lease local farmland and become successful. So next slide. I can finally stand up in front of you and say we've made some progress in this area. It has been a slow project, but we now have water installed and plumbing that moves the water to where it's supposed to be. And folks are using drip systems. We have an electrical pole and electricity should be flowing to the pole very soon. We have a hoop house in our warehouse that will be installed over the next couple of months. We received some funds, and thanks to the health department, I saw Marcy here, to purchase a very cute tractor, and also funds from the Puyallup Watershed initiative to purchase a BCS, which is, if you're not familiar, it's a small kind of walk behind tractor, which is what we use like in the plots. The farmers use that inside the plots to kind of shape their beds, and then the larger scale tractor is used for like cover cropping and tilling in cover crop and mowing all around. So we're getting things figured out. We purchased a cooler. We'll be moving it to the site. We're working on some permits with Pierce County. And this year we were very bare bones out there, but we had 5 farmers out there working hard, figuring out their stuff. And we will be tilling in the cover crop in the back section very soon. And there are 4 additional folks that we're going to be getting onto that site come February, which is just around the corner. So it's been very exciting. We have had so many applications. I think we have probably 20 people on our waiting list. Everyone that we have let in, with one exception, has identified as BIPOC. Some are immigrants, some are not. There are several folks on the waiting list that we would love to let in. We just don't have enough land. And so I wasn't sure how much demand there would be. Everyone told me that there would be a lot. But I now, like, I see it when the emails come through. There's a lot of interest in this. There's a lot of people who really want these opportunities. So we're still trying to kind of finish building out the site that we have, and then we'll be looking for additional acreage to kind of serve more people as we move through this. Kind of in a parallel track, we have been working at kind of in the same way to establish an urban farming program in partnership with the city of Tacoma. And so it took a long time. This was another pandemic project that just felt like it took forever because everything took forever in the early days of the pandemic. So we worked with planning folks in the city of Tacoma to develop a list of potential sites for urban agriculture, and we're able to launch a pilot farm. And so Holy Tree Farms just finished. 2022 was their first full growing season. And they were able, and they are a graduate of the Farm Foundations program. And they were able to grow a bunch of food heritage crops that are important to them because they're Guatemalan heritage. They do a lot of really cool things that I've never seen before. And they set up a little farm stand at the site. They're in South Tacoma. It's basically adjacent to the landfill, if you're at all familiar with that part of town, where the Tacoma Public Utilities big offices. It's kind of tucked back between there and the landfill. So it's a pretty low food security neighborhood, and they set up a farm stand and were able to sell food to their neighbors. And I think they have bigger and more plans for next year. And our hope is to have more and more of these sites happening within the city. It's been challenging to identify the parcels, but it's something that we're hoping to do all around the county, to find land that's not necessarily designated as agricultural land, but land that could support a small farm. Because as the next generation of farmers is going to look different than the past generations of farmers, the next farms are going to look different too. And so we're looking to be able to find those pieces of property that that could work for agriculture that maybe aren't going to work for something else like housing. So we're continuing to fundraise and hoping to fully build out our incubator site throughout next year, wanting to continue to increase our own capacity to provide technical assistance and partner with different folks to do some of the business planning and that sort of thing. As I said, we already have a long waiting list of folks who are really excited and interested in these types of opportunities. So it's been really heartening because it's been a lot of not so fun work to do some of the behind the scenes stuff. So now that it's actually getting real, where people can get their hands in the dirt and grow food to feed our community, it's been pretty satisfying to actually see things happen. And as I said, we have a number of different relationships that we're working on to build this kind of list of non-traditional sending sites, because we're still going to have this question of okay, now what? Once people graduate from our incubator farm, they'll be more capable of farming and being successful, but they're still going to need a place to do it. And so really wanting to develop a list of options for them to really support them staying here locally and being successful in growing food to feed our community. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions. As I said, I'm the program director, and so I have the big picture view of all of this, but Madeline Spencer is the program manager who really kind of conceived a lot of these ideas, and she's tending to her new baby, and we'll be back in February. And then Erica is in Guatemala with her grandma. So Erica is our farmer. And so I was hoping that they would be able to be here to speak to their experience of being our first official urban farmer. But you have me instead, but I'm still happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. That was a great presentation. Do you envision that this program is just going to continue year after year? And do you have plans to sort of grow the ability to reach out to more people that might want to join?
Yeah, for sure. We have at this point a 15-year lease with WSU. So our incubator farm, we can see out at least that far and have a pretty solid relationship with the Franklin Pierce farm where we do the training. And so I feel like, yes, both of these programs we're hoping to sustain. And if anything, we're hoping to grow our own capacity to provide technical assistance at both sites. Because right now we have most of our staffing capacity is used at the training site, and there's not as much time spent at the other site, like helping folks figure it out. So we're wanting to grow our capacity to do that as well. And then hoping to grow the amount of acreage that we have over time. And maybe there'll be more sites in time, but the amount of work to get one site built out, like I'm not biting that off anytime soon. So. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that traditionally farms have, a certain scale and operate with machines and, take place on certain types of soil. And I think what we've demonstrated in the city is that a piece of property, as long as it's relatively flat, we have access to things like Tegro, and I saw Kurt here, and compost from the county's recycling product. Like we can take urban soil and make it productive, and we can use, there's a lot of work in that field of small scale tools for small scale farmers like this PCS that I mentioned. That's one of a category of tools that is then developed for the small scale farmer that doesn't have a huge John Deere tractor, but has the ability to work in these smaller spaces. And so I think I see farms happening in smaller spaces in different ways that makes both farming and the food accessible to more people, not just having farming happening out in a big flat rural area and having the city people live in the city.
All right, great, thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, next, I'd like to introduce Robin Evans Agnew. It's going to talk about nursing research and voices of climate justice, just rights and responsibilities for health in the Tacoma High Flats.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to tell you to turn my slides. Is that right? Or
There's actually a clicker up there
There
that
is a
you can use. Yeah, we've upgraded. It's great.
Okay, great. And you can hear me if I do this. And I've got my clicker. Let's see. Okay, lovely. Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. So great to be here. I'm a nurse. What's a nurse doing in front of a group of Watershed people? It's a little intimidating to come to this. I presented at sort of other national public health kind of things, and I'm not as nervous, but I'm nervous around a group of you, so please don't bite. Why a nurse is concerned around things like the environment is a big question. You might imagine that Florence Nightingale kind of started this off with opening the windows, right? Thinking that the environment around the patient is important. In fact, Florence was quite a political person as well, but I do want to invoke, if I can, because I have a stage, Rufiada al-Assal-Mihar, and I'm probably screwing up her name, but she was a nurse in Saudi Arabia, or what was the kingdom, now the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, around 570, and she was able to establish a clinic in the middle of a mosque, and I think at that time, and probably now, that men are only allowed in mosques and in that area, and so this was a political act as well. So I think that nurses have been involved in policy, social policy, and politics for the protection of people for a long time. My real disclosure to you as I begin this is that I'm Welsh. So I have a different perspective as a new immigrant here that's kind of belied by my facial features and my accent, but I'm really from Wales. This is also another disclosure, as I have paint on my hands because I was just flooded about 4 days before Thanksgiving in my basement. And that's my basement right there with the flooding, the water in. And I realized that floods make a difference in people's lives, right? They change you. And I am changed now because of this flood, because of this being that has moved through my life and changed me. And I'm reminded too that RV residents across our tie flat plain are also inside that experience, right? From 2009 flood here in the Puyallup River Valley to other floods that are coming, that are going to happen. So that's some of my motivation. I got funding from UW Earth Lab for the first study I'm going to talk about. And the second study was just something I did on my sabbatical, but really it's the credit of the UW Tacoma system that provided me with a year-long sabbatical during COVID. So I want to acknowledge the land, and for me, a land acknowledgement has three parts. It's recognizing that there are people who own this land, and this is stolen land. The second part is to recognize that those people are still here and still thriving on this land. And the third part is a commitment to continue to care for the land and to work to change that. So I'm speaking on the ancestral lands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians who are enduring centuries of oppression and are resurgent in song, story, and culture, and still are caring for this earth. And I commit to caring for the earth and to be respectful, to respectful relations with our brothers, the salmon, the cedar, the rivers, the mountain, and the tide flat communities of Commencement Bay. So as a nurse, I'm reframing nursing in really in terms of this idea of just relations and responsibilities with a capital R for planetary health. And this is a new movement that's going on inside our health work. You may not have heard of us yet, but there was a big meeting in Harvard. There have been publications in The Lancet, which is quite a famous medical journal, on planetary health and really trying to orientate our practice towards planetary health. Here's my area of focus. What's brought me in was the sub-area planning work that was going on around the Tacoma tide flats. And I've always been sort of fascinated by tide flats all my life. I grew up on family trips driving past Ellesmere Port, which is next to Liverpool. Well, it's not really next to Liverpool, but anyway, we know where Liverpool is because of the Beatles. So that's my point of reference for you. But I remember this like looking out of the car in the dark and seeing all of these refineries and going, what lives out there? What is living out there? That's just a scene of violence, right? I was struck by that, right, at that particular point in time, and I got fascinated by that. So my agenda today is really to, I'm going to align myself with your goals. I'm going to give you some definitions that we've been working on inside nursing. And we're a very small, tiny group inside nursing, right? So we're kind of on a fringe, and this is a fringe experience for me. I've been doing a lot of fringe experiences all my life. And Dr. Becker will probably attest to that. And then I'm going to talk about these two studies. So we're trying to get there as quickly as possible. But I love these goals, right? Build all people's sense of their oneness with the natural world and a commitment to a healthy environment for human and ecological benefits. Thank you, Puget Sound. Thank you, Puget Sound Partnerships, for recognizing human health and thinking about human health. Thank you to the Highlands Creek Watershed group, who actually have one sign in their park that mentions human health. It's the only sign in the entire region that mentions human health. So anytime you guys want to build another sign, can you include human health in that? Because the public are not necessarily making that connection yet. And to correct environmental injustice by working to improve human health and the environmental outcomes in overburdened communities by bringing new and historically underrepresented voices to the conversation. So I'm going to talk about voice and the importance of voice in this work. One of the important parts of this is an end result. This is a sneak peek because I couldn't include it in my results because it really wasn't part of my study. One of the end results was that some of the voices of the kids that I worked with ended up on a permanent arts and culture Google site as part of COP26. So I had a pretty picture with this, but it disappeared, and now it's just a snowstorm. But this is a definition that we published. We were a global steering committee, had people from Canada and South America, of nurses coming together talking about climate justice and what does climate justice mean. We came up with this definition that it addresses the social, racial, economic, environmental, and multi-species justice issues of the climate crisis through centering the experiences and ways of knowing in frontline and fence-line communities and safeguarding the rights of nature to achieve planetary health. We do two sneaky things inside this definition. We capitalize nature, and we also introduce the idea of multi-species justice. And before you even know it, Nurses have read this and have published this, and our reviewers, peer reviewers, didn't ever question us on this idea of multi-species justice. But multi-species justice deepens our connection and our relationships, and my relationship with all of you, because you're working inside a multi-species justice kind of orientation and framework. So here's the definition of frontline communities for us. Some people find the word frontline offensive. We're still struggling with it. It doesn't necessarily cross international barriers, but it's being used in the United States and sometimes in Canada as well to define communities those that are often the first to experience the impacts of climate change and whose members have important insights and skills in coping and policy solutions. I'd say that carries over to fence-line communities, but fence-line communities are typically those people we think about in Cancer Alley, right? Those people that we think about who live in Fife, those people who we think about who live on the northeast slope of Tacoma, right? And smell schnitzer in the morning when they wake up and brewing their cup of tea. So they're the groups that are even close enough to an industrial or toxic environment to experience harm from the associated pollution, right? The additional pollution that comes from climate change, right? So they're a fence-line community already, and they are subject to more exposures because of climate change or what climate is happening. These slides at the top are part of the Twitter project that I'm going to talk about. This one is a bunch of kids because they're a frontline community, right? Kids are just by de facto nature, they're a frontline community, right? Their lungs are absorbing more of the pollutants and particulate matter that we have out there. They are absorbing all of the other sorts of social, political toxins that are around, and they're a vulnerable group, right? These are down by Harold Moss Park, at a place that people never go to the right of Harold Moss Park. And if you don't know Harold Moss Park, it was the first experiment, one of the first experiments the Port of Tacoma did to renovate and restore an area. It's beautiful. People don't see it, and the signs there are just disappearing and are forgotten. And I've overheard conversations of people feeling like it's a failed park. I don't think it's a failed park at all. And it's right behind the pagoda, if you're interested. This is an encampment right by the Puyallup River. It's dusk close to Christmas. And so I've used that word. Now I'll move on. So what's the definition of voice? Chris Knaus teaches in the School of Education at UW Tacoma. He does a lot of work in South Africa, a lot of work on race and kids and education, really sort of cutting edge stuff. And he wants to find voice as the ability to tell your story in a way that clarifies oppression. So really, that is voice. Knowing who you are, having something to say that will change something. This is a brief on the impact of climate change on human health. This is what the CDC published. If I had the fancy slide, the middle thing would spin around. And so I always think this is the spinning slide, right, of the 4 features that are causing us pause right now: rising temperatures, more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and increasing CO2 levels. I also add the retreat of our glaciers around here. So thanks very much for that earlier presentation to make us think about that. But really, climate change is one part of all of this sort of work that's going on. And I saw a poster around nitrogen levels in the streams in Puyallup on the Puyallup Watershed. That's another climate, another planetary health problem. So what did I do? During COVID, beginning of my sabbatical, you can't go anywhere, you can't move, but we can at least begin talking to people. So I worked with 2 family groups of kids that I've known since they were babes on their mother's laps, and I was working on asthma-related projects with these women. They call themselves Mujeres Latinas Apoyando la Comunidad, which is Latina moms helping the community. I was so excited to work with their kids. And they trusted me during COVID to bring them in, and thanks to the Center for Urban Waters for hosting us for 5 rapid days where they selected where they wanted to go, where they wanted to take photographs, and what they wanted to talk about. My only request was that they would explore how nurses should be caring for people in the planet. They were fully aware of the intention to display their work at COP26 in Glasgow. In the 2 months later, and they were fully aware too that we were going to, at the end of the project, present our findings to a group of planners and city planners in this county. Here we are standing at the top of the St. Road Waters, and I find there pointing to my beloved place, the tide flats. So this is a quote from one of the kids. Don't have time to show you all of their amazing photographs. Photo Voice is this incredibly exciting tool that people have been using for about 20 or 30 years now. It came out of sort of when it's now done in digital photography, but you take a photograph and it prompts voice. Because when we have a photograph to talk about, we have something to say, right? So Photo Voice is really a way of empowering people who are marginalized and people who may not feel like they're clever enough to be in the space to be able to talk about anything, to actually generate and listen and hear what they have to talk about. What Photo Voice generally tends to do is when a kid shows a photograph, everybody goes, oh, I get that impression. I have that impression too. So we don't need people to, we don't really need a way to recognize oppression. We all know the sort of oppressions that we're working with in a particular community. The job of a researcher is to really begin to figure out how I still continue to be oppressing those kids in the particular study, right? That's the dangerous part of this work that doesn't really sort of make it inside of the IRB kind of calculus, but it's an ethical point here. Here's this really important comment that this kid makes. I'm 14 years old, my pronouns are she, her. TJ says, the reason why I joined this group is to inform my community about our environment and what's going on with climate change and the way we are harming the environment. I think it's important that more people should get informed, especially youth, because this is an environment that we're going to grow up in and start families and create a safe environment for generations to come. That's really what this is about, right? This is what our work is about. This is the urban farms, farming work. It's for the generations to come. So we went down and looked at the Owens Beach project. No signs in Point Defiance, right, about the Owens Beach project. Walked right down there, looked on that little road that they closed off, and TJ snapped this picture. No signs to explain why they were raising the beach at Owens Beach. No conversation about climate. It's totally weird, right? I'm telling them about this. We've already just come from Ruston, where there's no signs saying this was a contaminated site and we've now repaired it. Nothing like that, right? People don't want to talk about the contamination in Ruston, right? They just want to talk about the shops and the farms and the great things that happen. TJ says, as you can tell in the picture, they're remodeling Owens Beach and they're taking pieces of down and building new things because in the next 100 years or so, the sea level will be rising. So they're ripping out parts of the park and moving it up so it can avoid flooding and the park's getting destroyed. This is caused due to climate change, which made glaciers and ice sheets melt and fill the ocean more, so it's filling up warm water. And I guess at this point, this is all we can do. I think it's good we're taking precautions. We're doing right now, so it's not too late by the time that the sea levels rise even more. Knowing sea level will rise will be more predictable for our next relatives taking action before it's too late. We can't go back on climate change like it's already happened. You can't reverse it. For me, the poignancy of like working with a kid that I've watched grow up, right, inside this emerging awareness about the importance of climate change, me being a nurse, never really having figured out a way to articulate that, right, and caring for a kid through this. But I think the only way we can help is to try to do things that are more eco-friendly and try to stop doing things that make climate change pollution or using factories or using pesticides stuff for the environment. So five youth, bunch of photographs from them and reflections on them. These are the basic sort of findings with this. They talked about regenerative practices. We went to the History Museum. They don't often get to go to places like the museums. And so when I was saying, where do you want to go? You want to go to a park or a museum? But this was first day and it was all about, people. It was all about what people do. And they looked at baskets in the museum. They picked up on, in the Museum of History, they got a line of clothes hanging on it and drying on it. One kid was fascinated by that, right? So they may be able to identify regenerative practices that go on, right? And they're also able to identify extractive practices, right? We went to a hospital and we got in this whole debate about why there's so many hospitals in Tacoma. Why can't we just have one? Which I always worry about. And then they described how the harm to the environment also harms people, and that nature was its own thing. And they ended up demanding action, this idea around reducing healthcare competition, reducing demand for technology, and improving waste treatment and teaching others. Fairly simple but important messages, and really important to kind of hear it from youth. So the second study I wanted to just talk about is this ongoing work I've been doing to try and begin to articulate what it means to be a nurse, to think about and care about climate justice, and focusing on the Tacoma Tide Flats as a particular place. So during like the 9 months of my sabbatical, I used the hashtag Tacoma Tide Flats to really report on and use the same sort of photo voice reflective prompts to look at the Tacoma Tide Flats and to ask myself, and this was my first tweet right at the top there, Port of Tacoma, occupied land, water and air, an example of climate injustice for our community. In is in parentheses. I know very little about what is in this place in this sabbatical year. I intend to ask myself the question as a nurse, what can I do to heal the planet? This is my last tweet inside the project. This is, I think, in June. There was a series of tweets. For those of you who don't tweet, I'm not a very good tweeter. But you do 1/4/7 if you want. If you've got too much to write and you can't fit it into 170 characters. So this is a picture of Swift on the Puyallup River and Gilbert wetlands. It's a great, amazing, amazing place. Really stunning, and it's going to improve as well, I think, with the plans that are in place. Last day on sabbatical, exploring this and using this to try and summarize the future health and regeneration of this amazing community. So my reflections are there, they're published on Twitter, you can kind of go and see what I did. But my goal really was to kind of engage with the community that was around the Tide Flats and participate in the discourses concerning the sub-area planning. So that's really kind of what I did. And here's my findings. So the quantitative stuff I have is that I increased my followers from around 134 to 274. I don't know whether that's really good or something to boast about or just to be embarrassed about. You can see my tweet impressions are kind of going down here in the section. They're all up. They're all going up because I'm busy and Twitter's trying to encourage me to tweet more, you know. I found Twitter personally to be kind of a toxic environment. What I noticed was, and I didn't put this on the slide, but if you were negative in your tweets, you tend to get more retweets and more impressions. I think at the end of the project, I was kind of glad to be done. But I was also kind of interested in that. We've been encouraged by UW Tacoma to spend more time on Twitter because, interestingly enough, in the academic world, tweet impressions about your articles that you publish increase the altimetric score of your article. So if you're not on Twitter and you're not tweeting about your article, it doesn't get the better score. And the journal looks at that and decides whether or not they want to keep paying the editor to do the work that they're doing to boost that particular journal. It's just internecine. Don't worry about it. It's nuts. Anyway, so here are some of my overall impressions and findings, right? I think that there's unclear and unjust relations and responsibilities for planetary health going on in the Tide Flats. Three principal ones is the continued fossil fuel expansion, right? People are calling it sort of like this green fuel expansion that's now going on, but it's really just still fossil fuel, right? So we have the South Sound Seaport Terminal that's planning on increasing the number of tanks. And that just came overnight, folks. South Sound, if you don't know where the South Sound Seaport Terminal on Marine Drive, it was nothing 20, 30, 40 years ago, and then it popped up. Oh, we have agency inside of this. Environmental degradation, of course, continuing on, and migrant detention. I include migrant detention because it's been identified by protest groups as a climate justice issue, right? And inside our thinking around nursing, we declared it a climate justice issue as well. I think there's this comes back to a comment I heard earlier when I first started working on the Tide Flats. Good friends said to me, I think Tacoma's turned its back on the Tide Flats. And that's fascinating because in the middle of the tweeting I was going on, one of our Pierce County council persons asked a question about, they were kind of going back on that, what does it smell like when you go past the Tide Flats? and a bunch of people responding, they were like getting into the negativity. And I came out with this like rant about the amazing different smells you smell on tide flats. Yeah, it's mixed up with asphalt, but you've got mud. It's mixed up with all these other sorts of things. But you've got things going on the tide flats. And that didn't get any impressions, no one paid any attention to it. So I really think that we've got a problem with engaging in repair and restoration of tide flats. It's not just about planting trees and quickly it is about the big work that's going on to repair some of those places. But I think that we have a bigger problem with engaging the communities that live and fight and around the kids I worked with, engaging them. That's more engagement. I'm still struggling with that. I'm not quite sure what that means, right? How to actually engage with the land. I'm so glad I followed the farming presentation, because that's about engagement, right? That's why it's so exciting. People want to do that because they want to engage in that way. And that speaks to the inclusion of voices. Totally, you heard my earlier comment. I think there's little respect for human health on the tide flats. Health is not monitored in general on the tide flats. It's per each company that works there. So those numbers are harder to find in terms of how well workers are doing. All I can tell you is, I walked around on a bad air day. You saw me with the mask down by Alexander Street monitor. That's the only air quality monitor we have on the tide flats. And I saw a bunch of people working outside, like breathing heavily on a bad air day without masks. So I know that's an issue. We have a tremendous heat issue on the tide flats. And we have problems with shade, because right now the philosophy is to try and decrease the amount of shade, because apparently it gets in the way of something like trucks, or I don't know. I don't quite know. It's not necessarily a philosophy, but it's just that there's less tree cover right down there. And that could be something you do. Oh, the other thing I noticed, of course, all of the places where workers actually sit outside, whatever thing they're in, it's usually it's pretty much, you're lucky if you get a picnic stand, right? Nothing else, right? So that's what I noticed. The transitional residents, I'm kind of keeping that term loosely, because I think we have multi-species communities that are transitional in there, and I'm not sure all of them are respected. In the sub-area plan, we mentioned salmon and shellfish. We've had a bunch of salmon talking here, but folks, and Jen Stebbins knows, because we got beaver down. We've got other things that are happening down the side. That's really exciting stuff. I want to just acknowledge Jen here too, who taught me a lot about iron bacteria. When I thought it was an oil sheet, she came out, she showed me we were welcomed by a killdeer. That was a brilliant moment. It was a really, really special moment. She was like, killdeer is telling us to move away. She speaks killdeer. I don't speak killdeer. So I'm like, oh, that's a killdeer. Sounds like it's going to kill me, but it's very small, but I'll move away. And I think ultimately kind of comes back to this idea of human health messaging. We're missing the boat. Thank you for including human health inside this work, but we're missing the messaging out to the rest of the community. These are just discussion items we pulled together, like a 32 principle section of Nurses on Climate Justice. Our climate justice principles, we work over 5 domains of sort of economic, ecological, ideological, political, and social domains, to really begin thinking around what we need to be doing differently in terms of climate justice as nurses. We're in the middle of trying to get this article published, but we're excited to kind of really think about, again, hashtag Nurses for Climate Justice, to really think about nurses taking more leadership roles and more action in working in transdisciplinary spaces. And this is probably more of an interdisciplinary space. No, this is more of a transdisciplinary space for me to be working in. Right? So transdisciplinary is when you work outside of your field. And then interdisciplinary, I'd be working with doctors and respiratory therapists. But when I'm working beyond that, that's where we need to be going in psychoplanetary health. We've got to use artists, farmers, everybody to kind of begin to work in this space. So that's a real challenge. My next steps, we got UWT biologists now teaching a class, getting students to kind of come down and interact on the High Level Estuary. Really exciting. They asked me about it. I was like, yeah, I'll show you around a little bit. I think that we have a lot of work to do to engage with these interspecies communities as a nurse in terms of thinking around research, education, advocacy, practice. I'm going to be having students work and collaborate down there with various communities. I'm working with the Fight Coalition. Will be there for the next 2 quarters. My wish list really for that sub-area plan is that it lacks imagination. Right? We need to be able to be thinking more creatively about the way we go. The idea of porous hardtop surfaces, love to see that posted there. That's something that we can be thinking more creatively about. Improving, not just trying to meet expectations, because unfortunately, well, that's what mitigation means, right? It means meeting expectations based on policy, right? And I'd like us to think about us exceeding expectations. That's how you get an A in my class. You get an A if you exceed expectations. If you meet my expectations, you get a B. Students don't like that. But that's really what it's about, right? It's about exceeding expectations. And we need to be thinking about design issues. The type lats is largely white, male-dominated terrain, right? It's largely toxic to a guy walking around, which is what I did all my time, trying to walk around the type lats and get to places. The naming of all of these places bears no resemblance to the first people who still live here, right? So we're building Melissa's Park right down on the Foss Waterway, and that is actually the first site of a major spring and stream that was named by the Puyallup. So we are losing names, and through that, that's colonial erasure, right? That's going on with that. So we need to think hard about that. I also think that we need to explain the toxic legacy a lot better to people. People need to know that the land they're walking on is being repaired or is in the act of repairing. They need to know the history of the traumas. You can't recover from trauma if you can't tell the story of the trauma. And the land has been traumatized on the planet over the years, over just 50, 60 years in some places, right? Very short amount of time. And it's time for us to do a better job with that. So that's it. I think that's my presentation.
We can do one quick question while I transition to the next topic.
Yes.
I personally have no tolerance for primarily a tsunami zone, but so be it. You do have people on your side. It turns out that the draft environmental impact statement, which we have over 27 comment on, has mitigation criteria in there, climate change impact of improving the tree canopy in the urban area. It includes the tide flats. So maybe someday somebody could put in the shade instead of
That's a good thing to have.
It is.
You know, and it is. I think it's part of it is the negative attitude towards it. There's been so much problem and not being resolved in a way. So, you know, I spend so much time down there, but it's really hard. And I tell my, even with my kids, right? I try to take them down. They're like, "God, no way! I don't know. You're someplace big." And I'm like, "You."
Yeah, one of the city council members just before, who he said, why don't we use a trail kind of flat mitigation?
Right. Right. Yes.
Might be a bit toxic, but intended in the right direction.
Well, the Taylor Avenue is now built out with because they have to put the cut pipeline in for the LNG plant. That sidewalk that is there now is 12 foot wide, so it's a really nice big sidewalk to walk on. So the new repairs are great. Milwaukee is probably the hardest street to walk over, knows it. But yeah, there's definitely some ways we can go some trails.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Our next speaker is Sandra Burns. She's the owner of Talking Forest LLC. She's going to be talking about empowering communication techniques to reach diverse audiences.
Hi, everyone. I have gone full circle. I got my private applicator's license, which I never had to use 11 years ago in this facility. I was going to Grace Harbor College, and I'm super excited. I've just traveled for the past 5 years. I've been to 11 countries and 26 states. I brought this talk to Baltimore for Society of American Foresters, and I was just at the Women's Forest Congress, the first Women's Forest Congress. About 500 attendees in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So yes, I'm excited. I came from Aberdeen, Washington, and I came from lumber, logging, fishing. My grandfather on my mom's side is a gill netter, and everyone that I knew were loggers, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to change what was going on in my communities and be more sustainable. So I have been absolutely excited to be in the forest sector, and I'll talk more about my education here. So how did I get into forestry? I mean, Aberdeen, Washington, I was born into forestry. I really had no other choice. So most of my family was log truck drivers. They were choker setters, logging, the whole operation. So what could I do to make a difference or change that in my family? And I went to school at Grace Harbor College. I studied forestry primarily. I have the AA, the AAS, and the BS in forestry and natural resources from Evergreen State College. And I can't believe I'm here 11 years later, standing here after being taught everything from Washington State that I know. I was really lucky in that I got to be with the Washington State Society of American Foresters as communications chair while I lived in Germany for about 3 years. So I was with someone who we went around in the military, and I have just come back from North Carolina. I had to learn Southern. Southern was kind of hard, especially coming from this area. So it's a whole different culture and language out there, as was Germany. And so I'll talk some more about that. But what do? I own my own business, and I've traveled a lot. It's really exciting to be able to be in a small town like Puyallup, or in the sub-watershed of Mount Tahoma, and be able to do this. And it's crazy when people look at me, they ask, and from all over, are you a student? No. Stop asking that question of young women and of other people. It's really hard to have that placed on you when you can be any age and own business. So my mental health and diversity, my own story, just really quickly, I am neurodiverse. I was diagnosed late because I was not noticed. I was high functioning. So I have high anxiety a lot of the times. I have PTSD. And so I just was successful. I dove, my coping mechanism was success. And I didn't know that until later in life, until I actually was removed from America, went to Germany, and I would travel to 11 European countries. I learned that there's a whole new world out there. And so my awakening was quite big. And so I've struggled in the forest sector, but why? Why did I struggle? Because I was a woman 12 years ago when these things in this room is the most diverse room I've seen in a long time. And I'm very excited for that because I was one of maybe a handful of women in the forestry sector. I had to build programs. So I built the Natural Resources Club. I resurrected Society of American Foresters within Grace Harbor College. And those were things that were pioneering, lots of pioneering going on there. So now I'm going to talk more about how I opened up spaces and opened up diversity. Neurodivergence is going to be talked about more. And I'm so excited for that. So my journey, it's been quite the journey. I have gone around the world, like I've said, and flying into SeaTac it still makes me cry every single time. I've flown into, the coast, the East Coast. I've flown into Germany several times, and Mount Rainier, Mount Tahoma always gets me emotional. Why? Because I I left for 5 years and I asked myself, why did I do that? It's so amazing. But here's a picture of some of the efforts I got to do. I got to be on the coastal plains of North Carolina, which are different than our coastal plains. They actually don't have loam. They have an entire sector where they create loam because they have lots and lots of sand. So nature has no boundaries or processes. Nature allows humans to heal no matter where they are. And I didn't actually know this until I was placed physically in different regions of the United States. So this is a group of Forest Her Women. This is a small organization that we make a big impact in North Carolina. And we support women landowners specifically of all different backgrounds. And I've written some stories that I was really excited to do. So I took my communications efforts in Washington State that I started with and replicated them wherever I went. And it's turned into different opportunities. So I wanted to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, and keep these in mind during this presentation. I needed like an easy definition. I needed something that I could relate to. And that was actually kind of hard to find, but this definition is helpful for me. So I hope it helps you. Equality is everyone getting a pair of shoes. Diversity is everyone getting a different type of shoe. Equity is everyone getting a pair of shoes that fits. Acceptance is understanding that we all wear different kinds of shoes, and these are work boots. I mean, in forestry, I've definitely had some great field days. Those boots are made for walking. Belonging is wearing the shoes you want without fear of judgment. And let me just point out that the word belonging and the word judgment in the same sentence is really complicated. It's very complex because we all want belonging. We all want belonging without judgment. So that fear is really hard when you're in a space where people oppress, people discriminate, people refuse services to you. And that has happened to me with my service dog across the United States, unfortunately. So some recent publications that have come out that I've been a part of, the Atlantic Rethink is a magazine that I got to work with the editor on a story called The Future of Forestry is Female. And this is a landowner that I was with for the Forest Her North Carolina group that I'm in. This is Louise Belk, and she was out of Goldsboro, North Carolina, which is close to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base where I lived. And I could not have been happier for her to be featured in this and other landowners from North Carolina that got featured in this. It's a piece that was actually funded by MasterCard of all people. And they're interested in this work. So this is a way to talk about diversity that reaches more people than just our local communities. And these people are from very small communities in North Carolina, but they make a big difference. So another thing that I've been able to do, I've been with Society of American Foresters for the same amount of time that I got my private applicator license, 11 years. And I have been able to be with all the different facets of forestry and Society of American Foresters. And they did a survey of DEI, and the survey was very interesting. The results are in this toolkit. So I wanted this toolkit to be accessible to people. And so we built an interactive web page with downloadable assets. So that's here at americangreenconsulting.com. And it was a huge effort. And also Forest Resources Association was also involved in that as well. But we wanted to have findings be accessible and easily shared. And there's lots of shareables on this page if you go on the website and scroll down. So physically flying around, going from different places and flying into all these states and countries was very interesting for me because it's how we get to destinations. But what has the internet done? The internet and social media have created a place where we can all access each other around the world. You don't physically have to go to Germany or England in order to reach these people anymore. And so that's a give and take. That's good and bad, but it's how you use it that matters. I figured that out after doing this for about 5 years. So we can choose the physical world, like the road and the journey that we're on, and we can also access each other virtually now. So it's really cool when I'm in the Twitterverse and I end up meeting someone that I've been back and forth with for a little while on topics that we are excited about, and then we're able to come together at a conference or whatnot and be able to see each other and physically make that face-to-face friend. So something I've been observing over the years and 12 years of communications in the forest sector, and something that I kind of want to ask you guys, and you can think about this, is how do we hold space for every person in our sector, in the outdoors sector in general? That's kind of a hard question because I have missed opportunities just because I was a woman. And that's very real. That's something that's happened. And I would have loved to have been in a field position early on, but my only field positions 12 years ago ended up being internships. I did apply for AmeriCorps Washington Conservation, and I did get a job offer from DNR. I applied for their forestry application office, and they ended up asking me if I wanted to be on wildfire. And no, I like to be a forester, not a wildfire person. So I went into communications and marketing instead. And so modern communications and marketing are no longer about finding the champions or the best people in our workplace to represent your organization. So your organizations, if you find people within, the people who make up your organization are more important to be able to feature them and what they do, not just championing the only person that knows how to talk about what your organization is aligned with or what they do. We need to actually pull people, I call them the underdogs, or the people that, even the people that are accounting are important in your organization. We need to be featuring these people and talking about them. So we have these people, women, minorities especially, who have been in our industry that need to be highlighted for what they do, no matter what position they're in or when they started. And I have been to the Mass Timber Conference in Portland, Oregon quite a few times. And there was a gentleman that approached me and said, "Oh, it's nice that you're here. We should be recruiting more women." And I said, "Yes, but also there are women here. There have been women here. We've been sitting in your offices. We've been sitting in your field. We have been here. We need to be featuring everyone and also the women and people that are involved in our organizations. So we need to communicate more than ever and allow for these conversations. No matter how hard they are, this is a challenge. This is not going to be easy." So how does this come and how does this come to fruition? Branding yourself, it's important to niche yourself. So forestry sustainability, certifications, these are all niche things that we can talk about and drill right into. So find a niche within, become known for that. So here we're talking about watersheds. Another thing that I have done that I have been really excited to meet people, and any organization can do this. Podcasting created the perfect medium to share diverse stories of my own sector from around the globe. So being able to communicate via podcasts is another avenue for people to hear our stories, and for stories that haven't been heard, more importantly, we need to be doing that. And I noticed when I started in 2018 that there was hardly any podcasts out there. I was the first woman in the USA to create it in our sector. And I wanted to hear people out, and people wanted to have that connection and that feeling of connection. So the medium of podcasting and the personal nature of it, the relationship you build with your listeners and the relationship they have with you, they could be sitting there chuckling and listening, and there's nothing like that. It's just amazing to meet that person and be able to connect with them and hear their story and hear them out. This is all about holding space, like I talked about earlier. So these are just some of the people that I have interviewed on my podcast, and I've met Kraus, Danielle, Max, Joe, Pivot, Andrew, and Amanda out of Oregon. I don't think I've met her in person yet, but these are the diverse people that we talk about when we're doing podcasts. I think it's really important to have that medium and to hear these people from what they do, all the different states that they have, and just talk about what they've been doing in their research or their work. They all come from different backgrounds. It's landowners, wildfire. Pivot is a researcher at OSU. I think she's graduated. And Andrew is out of the Institute of Chartered Foresters in England. And it was really cool to go there and see them in person after being friends in the Twitterverse. And yeah, that's a chainsaw and a baby. That's kind of interesting interesting marketing, but you know what? That's what we are talking about now. This is just coming out and talking about this is really important. So let's talk a little bit about Instagram. Instagram is a platform that is a visual platform, and it actually is based off of hashtags, primarily tags and hashtags. And so when we're researching our hashtags, we need to continue to tag things because this random, I don't know if this laser is going to work, but let's see. Yeah, I don't think this vehicle has anything to do with forestry. So what I'm telling you guys is if we aren't communicating about our niche and about what we're doing specifically in the watershed, it's going to be drowned out by weird random stuff. And people have asked me when I professionally work for them behind the scenes, why hasn't that been created? It's because we haven't been talking about it. And so we need to be. So some of the tools I've used, Canva, Adobe Suite, I use social schedulers, original content from people, photography and videos. I go out and document things. And some new things that are, really happening right now, reels, stories, and what are people looking for while on social media? They're looking for you to be relatable. That's the most important thing in diverse work, is to be relatable. That means talking about challenges. It's no longer the silence generation. We are actually talking about things that we are challenged with at times. Don't build your life around social media. Build social media around your life. Be a master of the platform, not a slave of it. So yes, Twitter is toxic. I agree. I'm glad you talked about that. It's really hard. I do this for a living, so I am inundated by social media every day. I do have my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I have ways, since I have audio processing disorder, to make sure that I don't get inundated and blow up myself. But it is how you use it that matters, and we can use it for good. So another platform I love using is LinkedIn, and the great thing about this is that it surged during COVID, no surprise. So it went from like 500 million to 690 million members in 200 countries and regions worldwide. And I'm super excited to see that it's expanded so much. It looks like Europe has a very strong hold on this, and United States not too far behind, but also, we are able to communicate with the world. We didn't used to have that capability. So this is really interesting. So find a niche to post about on LinkedIn. Decide whether to be a creator or a job seeker. So you can kind of pick that road. They allow you to do such, and I've been both. It just kind of depends. And I just use this as a mobile resume. I send my LinkedIn to people in Zoom chats. I would be Zooming right now with everyone and posting my link and saying, hey, this is my LinkedIn, check out what I've done. I've pretty much put everything in there. I've been a LinkedIn person since 2014. It helped build my career. I've had opportunities accidentally. I had fear of missing out on tall wood buildings in France, and I posted on a comment. I said, hey, I see that you're going to go do this. I would love to tag along. Ended up in a CLT, so cross-laminated timber block that was being built in France, and it was a complete accident, but I was with the architects, and I got to do stories about that, and that was just I couldn't even, it was in Strasbourg, just amazing opportunity. And it came out of just LinkedIn of all places, just asking, hey, what are you doing? Would love to be out there with you, and I could write stories about this, and it was not a paid opportunity, it was just pure chance. So messaging to leads, that's when you're going in and messaging people. It's important to talk to people about different opportunities and go in and see where it leads you, basically. Give value. So people are wanting value from your posts when you're in your organization. They are looking for education, awareness, diverse pieces, people that are in your communities doing work. And some of the examples that we've had today, I think would be great to post about. And education and awareness. So some resources I brought today, I have a book called Mine Heart for Diversity from Dr. Thomas Rashad Easley from the South. He has worked at Yale University in DEI and North Carolina State. This has just come out, and it's really exciting to see learned experiences in the DEI community. And for me, it was really important when I started to have allies come out and say, I see you're neurodiverse, I can help you through that. And diversity, equity, inclusion groups, there's ways that you can help. You can become a committee member, seek to understand, become an ally if you don't feel like you represent a certain group, and just support people that are definitely in the DEI community and people who are different than we're all different, but also people that are coming out as neurodiverse and people that are minorities. We really need support, and allies are the best way to do that. So, questions and answers. I also have stickers and cards as well. So I'll be in the back during the poster presentations. And yeah, I have some awesome, I'm a part of the Forest Proud effort. So I have plenty of stickers if you want any of those. And yeah. Yes, so I've gone to these kind of things for a long time, and what I do is I walk up to a student, unbeknownst to them, I'm gonna ask them, how can you tell this poster to the public? That's pretty much what you're doing on social media. You are having to tell the public what your research is about, and it's going to be very difficult to take out the acronyms, take out the charts and things like that that are not gonna be followed, and absolutely, it's hard to turn data into something that the public can understand. So if you can work on your research in a way that people can relate to, as long as you're relatable and you're posting about it in a way that people would understand. So using acronyms is not something I recommend on social media. I do not do it if I try to, but there are some conferences out there that are like, you know, SAF 2022, and you know, it's okay to do that, but just stay away from acronyms, make sure that your research is something that someone else can understand at a different level than your universities.
I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about your forestry as female and like really on these presentations, seems like a huge number of women, seems like women are in Hollywood state world. And I'm just wondering if you could,
I would love to elaborate. So I'm also friends with Landon Ladies, Danielle Atkins. I have a podcast episode on her, and she's up and coming, doing more than I am. I don't do TikTok. I've taken Talking Forest, so you can't take that. But TikTok's a little bit hard for me with some of my neurodiverse tendencies. However, it's really cool when you're able to see that community grow. And what I've seen come out of the University of Georgia, there's actually studies that have been done that women are inheriting land at a fast pace. And we need to be educating them and giving them resources that in even a decade ago, you know, were available for white males, but now it's different. There's a lot of things that need to be supported in those communities. And so the landowner community is really important. And that's why plugging into the DNR here actually has their own small forest landowner office. And then there's also associations out there that help landowners, but we also need to be doing more pieces and more marketing communications with women to feature them because they are inheriting land very quickly. And the pitch that I did to the Atlantic was, you know, there's women out there who aren't foresters or they have no idea what to do with their land, but they've inherited it. So what do we do here? There's a gap there, right? There's a knowledge gap. And so if you have support programs, that's basically what I recommend doing to try to help that.
Cool. I think we'll move into the next talk.
And I'm sad to say our last speaker is Cindy Abercamp and Jackie Bostry. Are we at, you have both? Just Cindy, okay. And Cindy's from Tacoma Pierce County Health Department, and she's going to be talking about protecting environmental health during extreme weather events, which we're having more and more here.
How to use the tools. So hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Haverkip. I use she, her pronouns. I am the new and first ever climate justice coordinator for the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. Thank you, Robin. I have actually surprisingly heard from partners at the Department of Health that I am the only person with the word climate as a full-time employee of the health department in the entire state of Washington. So this is a very new field that we're moving into at the health department, and it's increasingly important. But before we move on to my next slide, I realize that we are all humans together in a room, and this is exciting and fun, but you've been sitting for a long time. So I invite you to stand up, stretch, turn around, don't go away, but like, now, the reason I asked you to take a moment to take a deep breath is because I'm going to talk to you about climate change. I'm also going to talk to you about vulnerable populations who live around us. So hopefully you have taken a deep breath. If you haven't, do it again. My position in the health department came about because of the increasing health hazards we're facing here in Pierce County related to climate change. As you can see on this slide, and thank you to Robin's much better slide from the CDC with all of those different impacts. There are many different impacts to our human health because of climate change. So for example, we've got heat and cold related illness. Cold related illness is impacting folks right now. Exposure to human waste during heavy rain events and all kinds of other toxic pollutants happening because of flooding. Saltwater intrusion in drinking wells and into our local agriculture. Respiratory and cardiopulmonary issues based on wildfire smoke events. This is a big one. Anxiety, stress, and depression from the uncertainty of all these emergencies that just keep coming at us. And of course, we have an increased frequency and levels of toxic algae blooms, which really impacts our watershed, especially during the recreational season. While there's still time to mitigate for some of these issues, in most cases, as you've heard, like in our glaciology conversation today and some of the things that Robin mentioned, it's kind of too late for mitigation. We are really at a point now where we need to adapt to these changes. And the health department is here to try to help everyone, specifically vulnerable populations, but everyone, help us all adapt to these things that are happening in our world. We are going to need to learn how to live with these situations. Sorry to be a downer. In early 2022, the health department learned that we would receive funding to tackle some of these challenges from the Washington State Department of Health. Through a program at the National Environmental Health Association, we received a Climate Health Adaptation and Mitigation Partnership grant. We definitely acronym that to CHAMP because it's a lot easier to say. So this grant encourages local health jurisdictions like the health department to build their climate and health workforce and workforce capacity, engage in cross-sector partnership building, and develop and implement adaptation and mitigation plans. The graphic here shows a suggested progression for moving through these efforts. And it may be hard to read out there, but the very first step in the process is to assess climate needs and strategies. Here in Pierce County, we've chosen to focus our first plan on extreme heat planning. So yeah, it's winter, but I'm going to talk about heat. It's kind of important. It turns out that heat, extreme heat, is the most deadly climate impact we are facing. In fact, you may all remember the heat event, the heat dome event in June of 2021 that claimed 29 Washingtonians' lives. And this took many jurisdictions and organizations by surprise. We were not prepared for extreme heat. It doesn't happen here very often, but it's starting to happen every year. So we really need to adapt to that. We find that the extreme heat, like many other climate problems, hits vulnerable populations like the unhoused, seniors, and folks in rural areas, especially hard. And I'm about to get my papers all mixed up. You see papers flying around, that's what that means. Oh, there we go. So through the early months of 2022, I did not work at the health department then, I'm very new, but from like January to June, we worked hard to develop our first draft of the heat action plan, basing some of our work on California's extreme heat plan. We recognize, of course, that there are differences between a state plan and a county plan, and we also had to reframe that through our own unique weather conditions. So the plan has 5 actions and many sub-actions. Here's an example of a few. So action 1 is we feel like we need to build public awareness and notification through targeted communications campaigns, and also some of those need to be targeted to specific populations, people we are most concerned about, and also people who may speak other languages. There's all sorts of ways that we need to target this heat information to the population. Another thing we need to do is support that climate science and research to inform risk assessment and decision making. That's where we are doing a lot of partnering with other organizations. We have, Robin and I am talking about teaching to his class. So we have a partnership at UW there. We also have a partnership with UW with their UW Change program, which is a heat risk planning tool. So we are supporting those efforts and also learning more about them by being partners with these organizations. We also need to improve our accuracy and accessibility of heat modeling and data. So we haven't really been tracking heat-related deaths very well at the health department. In fact, medical examiners often label certain deaths as something other than heat-related when they're actually heat-related. So all of that information, we need to really dial that down and try to understand that better. We are studying location-based data. So we're asking our assessment and program development folks to not only tell us how many people are visiting emergency rooms, but also where those people are located. This will allow us to focus our efforts in helping those people who need us the most. Action 2 is strengthening community services and responses. So we'd like to, at the health department and throughout the county, to invest in social resilience. This is helping people to have those emergency plans ahead of time in their homes or in their communities if they're unhoused. A lot of folks are just not prepared and they don't have the means to respond to a heat emergency. So we'd like to help them build their social resilience by giving that kind of information. We also, of course, have to protect health department employees and our clients who visit the health department from the extreme heat. We had some situations last year where people were coming to the health department for client services, but we didn't have enough water for them, or we didn't have a tent for them to be under. So these are the kinds of things we need to consider, and we're hoping other organizations will consider also. Strengthening emergency preparedness and response. I partner on a daily basis with the health department's PEPR group, and PEPR stands for Public Health Emergency Response and Preparedness Group. We work together very closely. And finally, support city and state planning and response measures to extreme heat. So we are working together with the city of Tacoma, the city of Puyallup, all around to help all of us work together to develop extreme heat plans and other extreme weather plans to be prepared for these situations. What we find is that different jurisdictions have different thresholds for heat. So for example, the city of Puyallup might say, well, we're not going to do anything until it gets to be 95 degrees for 3 days in a row. And the city of Puyallup or Tacoma might say something completely different. So we're hoping to align all of our efforts together so we can determine a threshold at which we will all do something on behalf of the people who are most impacted. Another section of our response is increasing the resilience of the built environment. So we need to look at protecting critical infrastructure as climate changes, supporting heat resilient and cooler communities, investing in cool buildings and surfaces, and finally, utilizing those science-based frameworks and tools that exist already. So an example of how we're doing that is recently we made some comments around a warehouse building that's being built in the South Tacoma area to improve their efforts around this. And we asked them to do things like have white roofs and make sure that they have electrical charging stations for vehicles and possibly require some of the trucks to be electric. So that's an example of the work that I am doing with the health department to improve the situation in the built environment. Section 4 of the plan is about nature-based solutions. So we are going to, at the health department, promote nature-based solutions to reduce those extreme heat risks, support nature's ability to withstand and adapt to increasing temperatures. I should have capitalized nature, Robin, sorry. And reduce the heat risk to our water supply and systems. That's another place where we have to be concerned about harmful algal blooms as the temperature rises and the algae impacts our lakes and streams. That can also impact our drinking water, which is very, very concerning to the health department. Our final action in the heat action plan is recommendations for partners. And our main hope is that through the plan, we can encourage cooperation and collective action to fight this threat to our environment. And while the health department tends to focus on human health, we all know that extreme heat impacts all parts of our environment, from our plants to our fish, our birds, and other animals, and to our waters. So I'm with you, Robin. Planetary health is where it's at. In addition to the heat action plan, we are finalizing a heat response plan. And while the heat action plan can be seen as our long-range planning document, some have called it aspirational, which can be good or bad. The heat response plan is a fully actionable guide to how the health department will respond to extreme heat emergencies. It has a focus on heat thresholds and emergency preparedness, emergency response plans, based on the health department's unique responsibilities listed in the county's comprehensive emergency management plan. If you haven't looked at that, it's very interesting. Different organizations within the county have different responsibilities in an emergency, and we are sticking to our lane and doing the things we need to do. Mostly, we are interested in providing health information and education. But this year, we got to do something really fun, and that was a little bit of direct service. So I'm going to go on and tell you about that. Because this is a lot more interesting than the incident objectives I had on the last slide. So a new way we've been responding to and preparing for climate emergencies is through direct service, which we will continue as long as funding allows. Hopefully the state of Washington will continue to fund this work. For example, this summer, we distributed 287 box fans. We distributed those to family and adult shelters, veterans, Indigenous peoples, and community resource centers around Pierce County. We also handed out almost 2,000 cooling towels, and these are especially helpful to our outdoor workers to help them cool while they're working. We've given these to health department staff, the folks that need to work outside at the health department, also to the city of Puyallup, and through our communities of focus. And if you don't know about the Communities of Focus program within the health department, I encourage you to look it up. The health department has identified 6 communities where we are putting extra effort. So it's, again, that locational response to emergencies that we are concerned about. And these communities, we tend to focus our resources toward them because they are most in need. So we don't just do heat stuff. We also have been acting during this winter event, the cold events of the winter. So we worked with our partners who serve the unhoused, providing tarps, waterproof gloves, hats, and socks. Staff have generously donated warm clothes and blankets through our Neighbors Helping Neighbors clothing drive, and through a donation from our FEPR department, we've been able to share nearly 200 backpacks and emergency supplies, which are a common request from our service providers. Another super exciting effort that we're undertaking within Pierce County, and especially in the rural areas, is to assist climate readiness by installing air quality monitors on school buildings. This helps school district employees make decisions related to air quality. So both extreme heat and wildfire smoke impact our air quality. And schools often have questions about whether or not it's safe for kids to go outside for recess or to participate in their after-school sports. So we get to be the bad guys and say, you should stay inside for recess today. They do not like that call, but they ask us, so we have to tell them. Also, we put these monitors on the building, so the facts are there, the data's there, they have to say, okay, I guess we're playing in the gym today. Anyway, my colleague Jackie Busby, who wasn't able to join us today, is responsible for installing, repairing, and monitoring these devices. And while the program originated with grants from Microsoft and in partnership with U of Tacoma, and most of those air quality monitors were originally located in the Tacoma Public Schools, we have secured more funding and are very excited to announce that we have now installed sensors in many of Pierce County's rural areas, including the Carbonado School District. That's where this picture is from. Also the Bethel School District, a little further out down south, and in the Peninsula School District. So that is spreading and we're excited about that. As we move forward in our climate response and preparedness plans, we'll be focusing on the following strategies and working with our partners on these things as well. So we are very concerned about tree canopy. We're working with the Tacoma Tree Foundation to figure out ways to improve tree canopy. Also, there's a professor here at WSU Extension who is doing inventories of tree canopy around schools. So we are working with him to keep an eye on that. We also are monitoring data more closely, like I mentioned earlier, looking for not just numbers, but locations. We are building partnerships every day. That's a big part of my job, the part that I love the most. And we are doing outreach and education wherever possible. The next step for us is not to just be focused on heat. Of course, there are numerous climate issues facing all of us. So in the next couple of years, we will work on action and response plans for flooding, wind events, including tornadoes, because they happen here now, and extreme cold. So folks, do you have questions? Again, Cindy Haverkamp, and I work for a division at the health department with a very long name, social, environmental, and economic conditions for health. I would love it if you email me if you don't have a question right now, and we can talk more about it. Robert.
I do have a question. I can't wait to ask you this because you told me you're the first climate justice person in the state. So you're working in the Puyallup watershed. Do you get pushback? Do you have people kind of confused as to why a health department person is doing this? And how are we managing that? Because it seems like this is something what I talked about too, is that these two worlds kind of need to work together. So I'm curious as to your response.
Luckily, I'm very new. I haven't had to face down those questions yet. But I've thought about it quite a lot. And what I would probably talk about is that my job has a lot to do with weather. And you really can't deny what's happening with the weather. It's very different than it has been in the past. So I may not always use the word climate. I may just talk about weather impacts because everyone can agree on those. I'm sure it will get harder though, Robin, as time goes on. Yes.
So I just came from the coastal plains of North Carolina, and 93 days were pretty normal for months. We have air conditioning, so I know air conditioning from living in Washington State on the coast. It's not always a thing. People can't really afford it. So getting fans out is great, but is there an alternative to air conditioning units?
That is also a great question. There actually are rules. Some landlords actually have rules against air conditioners in window units. So we are working in situations where air conditioners are not always a possibility. They're also very heavy drain on the electric grid. So we work hard to share education about how to use a box fan in ways that might be surprising, like to kind of turn it into an air conditioner by putting a wet cloth across it and blowing through that. We also hand out with those box fans air quality filters, and we teach people how to turn them into a wildfire smoke filter for the other parts of the year. So we're really kind of focused on the box fans at the moment, and we have a grant for next year to get even more box fans. So we will probably focus on that in the future as well. One thing I will say though, that there are low income programs to help people get air conditioning and heating and all kinds of things. I don't know as much about that, but we may also speak to people about that as a possibility, especially as it becomes less expensive, or if there are programs for that. We've talked a lot about providing both HEPA filters and fans and air conditioning units to shelters and also to adult family homes. So in some cases, we would recommend that or try that, but in others, we're going to stick to the box fans for now. And I think if the lights turned out, it must be time to almost go.
I would just like to thank all the speakers.